Welcome to the Fantasy Audiobook. American Comics. Starting Social Security Black Silk Wanda. Chapter 81. I'm back. Hod waved his hand to dispel the mist covering his face. The reason why he didn't reveal his identity was because he didn't know what Wanda was thinking now. It was also for this reason that he didn't speak. Hod, can we go out for dinner today? Hela looked at the familiar courtyard, and a hint of annoyance flashed in her eyes. Although she had not been here for a long time, she was already fed up. She was not a person who was content to stay here, and staying here was simply killing her. You want to go out? Hod glanced at Hela beside him, and finally nodded. Then let's go out for dinner together. After all, Hela's performance today was actually quite good. Although everyone except Hela was taught a lesson, it was also a lesson for them. He really hoped that the Avengers could protect the world, so that he wouldn't have to worry about these things. Good. Hela nodded without hesitation. Going out to eat without having to stay in this place was even more pleasing than beating Thor up. Lorna. Hood walked into the room and shouted. Hearing the noise, Lorna rushed out of the living room. She was obviously very happy, but when she saw Hood, she stopped and lowered her head and shouted, Mr. Hood, you're back. Yes, it's nice to chat at home. Let's go out for dinner. It must be said that looking at the shy Lorna, Hood couldn't help but pinch her face. Although Gwen is also youthful and cute, Lorna is much more shy and timid in comparison. Really? Lorna's eyes widened, blinking. After getting a positive answer, she rushed back to her room and changed her clothes. Hod drove the Bumblebee directly to a Chinese restaurant on Central Avenue in New York City. He ordered some familiar dishes and was about to eat. The system's voice suddenly rang in his mind. Ding. Your decision successfully prevented the outbreak of the Avengers Civil War. Get reward. Phoenix Force Fragment no will. It seems that it is not too different from what I guessed. Hod was very curious about how to obtain the Phoenix Force Fragments before. After careful consideration, he found that as long as you participate in special events, the probability of getting rewards is 100%. And if the original plot is changed significantly, the reward will be better. For example, if there is no interference in the Avengers Civil War, Tony will definitely know that his father was killed by Bucky. In a way, this has already changed the direction. Phoenix Force Fragment 4/12. As soon as he obtained the Phoenix Force Fragment, a gentle force flowed through his body. He could clearly feel the newly injected Phoenix Force merge with the previous Phoenix Force. The power in his body also began to grow rapidly. If he was aware of it, he could even sense the entire Earth. A little Phoenix Force pressure seeped out of his body, although no abnormality occurred. But Hela, who was sitting opposite him, was eating, and her body movements stopped instantly. Even the fork in her hand fell into the plate at this time, making a crisp sound. She suddenly looked up at Hood in front of her, her eyes widened. Her eyes were filled with disbelief, and even her heartbeat slightly accelerated at this time. Because just now, she could clearly feel that Hood's strength had become stronger again. And this time, the strength was much stronger than before. The reason why she came to this conclusion was because she noticed a little breath overflowing from Hood just now. Because with Hood's strength, it was difficult to make Hood's power control have problems. And if there was a little bit of aura leaking out, there was only one possibility, that was that his strength suddenly increased. At that moment, he did not control his strength in time. And she could also determine that Hood had become stronger through the aura that was emitted. What the hell is wrong with this guy? Can the people of Midgard now even improve their strength by eating? Hela twitched her lips, feeling mixed emotions. This was too discouraging. Not only was he much stronger than her. Moreover, she saw that Hood was not a very hard-working person. He basically spent 24 hours a day enjoying himself. He couldn't understand why such a person could be so powerful. Although Hood noticed that Hela's expression was a little strange, he did not ask. Instead, he looked at Lorna beside him patiently. Is it delicious? Lorna was like a cute little rabbit when she ate, eating carefully. This is much more delicious than I thought. At first, Lorna saw the dishes like awful and kept refusing them. But when she put them in her mouth, she found that they were really delicious. If it tastes good, eat more. If you are not full, we can order more. Hod now regards Lorna as a little sister. Although she has gained some weight after living here recently, she still looks skinny. It is no wonder that Wanda thought Lorna was a minor when she saw her. The timid eyes and the malnourished body, if I am not mistaken, it is really a ghost. Okay. Lorna nodded excitedly and continued to eat. Hod, whose strength is unfathomable, can you tell me if that person over there is your lover? Hela ate a piece of salad, twirled her fork with her fingers and said unhappily. Why? Hod sighed, looked up and said, Yelena, do you really like to follow others so much? In fact, when he came here, he had already noticed that Yelena had been following him. Although she had changed her hair color and makeup, there was absolutely no way to change the familiar aura. Moreover, after coming here, she pretended to be calm and turned on the recording on her mobile phone. It was just that he didn't want to pay attention to her because he was having dinner with Luna and others. Haha, I didn't expect you to find out like this. The woman at the next table was embarrassed and at a loss for a moment. She had obviously changed her whole body and even put on sunglasses. But even so, Hood noticed her. In order to follow Hood, she really put a lot of effort. If Hood hadn't driven out, she might not have been able to see Hood. It's you. Lorna looked up and saw Yelena and was stunned at first, but she quickly recognized Yelena's identity from her breath. After all, Yelena had appeared once before. Although appearance can change, personality and temperament are difficult to change. Even you recognized it. Yelena saw Luna greet her, and the corners of her mouth twitched slightly. She now began to wonder if her disguise skills had declined. Come and sit here. Huoda gave a look and gestured. Humph, I just happened to run into you, so I wanted to follow you and take a look. Yelena pouted, picked up her bag and sat next to Huoda. Although she was recognized, she would never admit that she was following Huoda. In other words, you are here for Natasha. Hod tapped the table lightly with his index finger, and turned to look at Yelena with a faint smile. Although his expression seemed very calm, Yelena's heart was also nervous. The guy in front of her had a power beyond imagination. Right, Yelena nodded calmly. Oh, a hint of gloom appeared in Hood's eyes, and he changed the subject, don't pretend. Next time you follow me, I don't mind if the Red Room disappears from this world. The moment this indifferent tone was spoken, Yelena felt as if she was stared at by a beast. Goosebumps spread rapidly upward along the position of the coccyx, and her pupils trembled slightly. She didn't know why Hood could see her true purpose at a glance. Because in order to avoid being sensed by Hood, she only installed surveillance at the entrance and exit of Hood's car. She didn't even go there herself, but just entrusted others to handle it. But even so, she was seen at a glance. Sorry. Yelena looked terrified, her voice trembling as she immediately bowed her head and apologized. She knew very well that what Hood said was definitely not a joke. The previous incident at the Hydra laboratory was still vivid in her mind. I don't want it to happen again. Hod said calmly, picked up the sweet and sour pork in front of him and stuffed it into his mouth, mumbling, Eat it, it tastes good here. In fact, he knew that Yelena appeared in New York 2 days ago. Not to mention his perception, when she appeared, Red Queen reported the news immediately. So he didn't need to think about her purpose, he knew it must be for him. I understand, Mr. Hood. Yelena quickly picked up the food with chopsticks, buried her head and ate without saying a word. Now she would never dare to resist whatever Hood asked her to do. This is the sense of oppression brought by strength. At the intersection not far from the window, a black SUV was waiting for the traffic light. When the man in the main driver glanced over, his eyes instantly stared at each other. Wait, isn't that Yelena? Agent Maria Hill only took a glance and noticed Yelena, who was eating. Although she was wearing makeup, how could she not see it after so many interactions with her? Shouldn't she be in Poland now? Hill couldn't understand why this guy came to New York. Last week, the Hydra laboratory in Poland was destroyed. The bald black man wearing an eye patch was speaking in the co-pilot seat, looking sideways at the French window of the Chinese restaurant. This man was Nick Fury. Destroyed, Hill couldn't help but exclaimed, and asked in a shocked tone, who on earth has the guts to do this? That's Baron Strucker's territory. S.H.I.E.L.D. had thought about whether to find a way to deal with Baron Strucker before. Although we know the exact location of the enemy, there are too many factors involved. For example, international factors, etc., are all big problems. In addition to the strength of the enemy, we have not taken any action. But I didn't expect that it would be destroyed after such a short time. I'm not sure, because I'm no longer in charge of the Hydra case. Nick Fury shook his head, paused for a moment and then said, let Coulson help keep an eye on Yelena. Yes. Hill took a deep look at the man next to Yelena, then drove away. After the two left, Hood slowly turned his head and looked at the taillights of the car in the distance. This guy is actually in New York. Hodder couldn't help but wonder in his heart. After all, he had never thought that Nick Fury was here. This really surprised him, because if this guy was here, he didn't intervene in the Avengers' Civil War, but chose to sit back and watch. After thinking for a while, Hodder also figured it out. Since this guy faked his death, he rarely cared about such things. Basically, he focused on fighting against threats outside the Earth. Of course, this cannot rule out a possibility that this person may not be the real Nick Fury, but a Skrull. Mr. Hodder, is there anything over there? Lorna, who was standing beside him, noticed that Hodder was in a daze and asked with a puzzled tone. Nothing, just saw an acquaintance. Hodder shook his head and retracted his gaze. Just as he was about to eat, his brows slightly frowned. I didn't expect another acquaintance to come. Buzz. The entrance of the restaurant was shining with golden light, and a figure wearing a red cloak walked into the restaurant. But judging from his current situation, Steven's condition was not very good. Although his back was straight, there were some scratches on his face, and there was blood at the corners of his mouth. His clothes were also covered with a lot of dust, as if he had rolled on the ground. Oh, I didn't expect that the magician would not protect the world but play in the mud on the ground. Hood felt that Steven's breath was very stable, and then looked at Steven with a teasing look. Stephen Strange did not pay attention to Hood's teasing, but spoke with a solemn look. Hood, the world is in trouble. How can you be sure that this is not a test? Hood picked up the black chicken soup in front of him and stirred it slightly. The greasy soup surface was constantly rotating, emitting a faint aroma. You know everything. Steven didn't expect that Hood had figured out the last test. Nonsense, your acting skills as a magician are also third-rate magicians. Hood stopped what he was doing and looked at Steven again. Tell me, what happened this time? Dormammu's follower Kaecilius wants to help Dormammu invade reality. Steven's voice became rare solemn when he spoke, and the expression on his face did not seem to be lying. Moreover, this guy with a high self-esteem would never act so embarrassed even if he was lying. But when Steven made this second-year speech, everyone's eyes were focused on Steven. This not only made Steven feel a little embarrassed, but he blushed and continued, Are you free? I would like to invite you to go to the temple with me. Mr. Hod, I'm full. I'm leaving now. Yelena didn't know what it was, but it was definitely something between mages. She didn't want to stay with Hod anymore, so she took this opportunity to slip away. Hela, take Lorna back after you finish eating. Hod agreed casually and followed Steven into the dimensional gate. As soon as he came in, Hod noticed that the temple was in a mess and there were signs of damage everywhere on the walls. It was obvious that someone had fought here. In fact, he had already anticipated what happened to Dormammu. Steven, is this the master you mentioned? A black man in a green robe walked over quickly with an unhappy look on his face. He originally thought that Steven went to find a master but found a young man instead. Mordo, this is Mr. Hood, please be respectful. Wong walked down the steps quickly and put the dusty book on the table beside him. Mr. Hodder, although Mordo had never heard of this name, he did not speak in the end after seeing the king's attitude. Mr. Duh, we asked you to come here this time in the hope that you can help us deal with Dormammu. The king did not beat around the bush and directly stated his request. Help me. Hod touched his chin, his mouth curled up. Sure, but you have to show me the Book of Vishanti. What? This is absolutely impossible. Mordo's face changed drastically and he waved his hand violently. This is the most important thing in Kamar Taj, and outsiders are usually not allowed to read it. Even Wong and Steven showed hesitation on their faces. The Book of Vishanti is the treasure of Kamar Taj. Steven's expression was complicated and full of hesitation. Logically speaking, it was impossible to lend it out. Wong stood aside in silence and did not speak for a long time. If you want me to pay, there must be some price. Hod's mouth curled up, as if it was a matter of course. He was very interested in the mirror space in the Book of Vishanti. This is a space that can be entered alone without affecting reality. More importantly, everything in the space moves according to one's own thoughts. What he lacks most now is this ability. Let alone other things, he doesn't even dare to test his strength to his heart's content. If he has a mirror space, he won't have to hold back even if he encounters an enemy. For example, when he fought Agatha before, he was still suppressing the power of the Phoenix as much as possible. Because there are too many people nearby, he doesn't have the hobby of destroying other people's houses for fun. You know, his current strength is a super single universe. If he lets go and fights, the planets under his feet will probably be crushed. Absolutely not, the Book of Vishanti will not be lent to you. Modu frowned and made a gesture of invitation. Mr. Hod, please go back. He didn't think that such a young man could be so strong. Moreover, he had never heard of Hod before. Not to mention that this person wanted to read the Book of Vishanti right away, which was simply a pipe dream. This is not your business. Looking at the black man chattering in front of him, Hod frowned slightly. You. Mordo gritted his teeth and stared at Hood with a bad look. But he also knew that what Hood said was indeed the truth, and it was indeed not his business here. What's the point of looking at me? Isn't what I said the truth? After Huoda finished speaking, he slowly set his eyes on Wong. Stephen. Wong looked at Stephen with a tangled expression. Because he also knew that Hood was very powerful, maybe he could really help them solve this problem. If they wanted to deal with Dormammu with their current strength, it would be very difficult. Buzz. With a sound like turning pages, the glass door opened quickly to both sides like a page of a book. Several figures walked in unhurriedly. The tall and thin man walking in the middle had eye shadows around his eyes like fragments of a deep pit. He walked in slowly, looked at the people present, and raised the corners of his mouth. I didn't expect that, Wong. You are here too. Kaecilius grinned and set his eyes on Wong. Kaecilius, you actually came here. Baron Mordo looked solemn, with a golden halo flashing above his fist. His eyes were full of vigilance, because this guy was the proud disciple of Master Ji Yi, and his strength was very strong. I just came back here to take a look and clean up the garbage. Kaecilius put his hands behind his back, facing the vigilant look of Baron Mordo. His expression was extremely calm. I didn't expect that you would still be so stubborn until now, and you actually brought this thing back with you. It was rare for Wong to say such harsh words. His eyes were filled with anger. This traitor actually helped Dormammu for his own selfish interests. Obstinate and refused to change. Kaecilius opened his arms and laughed loudly. It is obviously you who are obstinate and refuse to change. As long as he can satisfy Dormammu, he will be able to gain endless life. Why does this guy have such dark circles under his eyes? Is it because he indulged in love too much? Hodder suddenly started to complain at this time. This is more serious than it looks in the movie, and even the area around the two eye sockets is covered with eyeshadow-like black fragments. To be precise, this is the mark left on his body by the spell he practiced. Kaecilius is one of the disciples of the Ancient One, and he can be said to be gifted among all the disciples. However, he later betrayed the Ancient One and defected to Dorcam, the Lord of the Dark Dimension, and even became this inhuman and ghost appearance. Although he is a pitiful person in terms of his life experience, the long-term torture has also made him twisted. The reason why he appeared here is because Kaecilius's goal is to destroy the major temples and release Dormammu into reality. Kaecilius heard this and only then noticed Hodder's figure. When did this person stand there? When he came in just now, he observed the environment as soon as possible. He only noticed Mordo, Wong, and Stephen, but how did this person appear? But he didn't think much about it, but slowly opened his posture. A transparent magic sword slowly appeared in his hands. Kill them. Kaecilius didn't intend to waste too much time with them. The others instantly dispersed and rushed towards different targets. They all held transparent magic swords in their hands. At first glance, it even looked like the space was twisting. Who are you? After seeing Wong and Mordo being entangled by their own people, Kaecilius focused his attention on Doctor Strange. Stephen Strange. Although he saw Kaecilius walking towards him, Stephen still gritted his teeth and used the round shield. You can also call me Doctor. Stephen. Although Kaecilius had never seen Stephen, he had heard of him. So he immediately stepped on the wall and rushed towards Stephen. Killing a genius is a pleasant thing. Stephen was about to fight, but the next second he found that his round shield flashed twice and was directly destroyed. At this critical moment, he could only pull out a magic whip, and golden light kept flashing between his hands. As the blurry magic sword swung, Stephen could only pull his hands apart and forcibly use the magic whip to block Kaecilius' attack. But the skills of both sides were not at the same level, and they were kicked away in just 2 rounds. Seeing Kaecilius getting closer and closer, Stephen could only grit his teeth and get up to continue fight. The situation of others was not much better at this time. Mordo was surrounded by 3 people, and the cooperation of the 3 was extremely perfect. He didn't even have a way to deal with so many people at the same time. He was even beaten back step by step. Bang! Buzz! With a crisp sound, one of the magic swords slashed fiercely on the round shield condensed by Mordo. A hint of joy flashed across Mordo's eyes, and a magic whip was instantly condensed in his right hand. Buzz buzz buzz! He quickly and neatly whipped the man in front of him away. At the same time, his body stepped back several steps, and the magic whip in his hand was waving quickly. The golden light continued to surround him, forcing the enemies who wanted to bully him to step back a few steps. Ha! The magic whip spun in the air, and with a buzzing sound, it whipped towards one of them. The brilliant light and shadow whipped the man violently. With just one blow, the man was hit hard and embedded in the wooden floor. Very good. One has been solved. Mordo breathed a sigh of relief. As long as he could deal with one of them, the pressure would be greatly reduced. Buzz! But just as he breathed a sigh of relief, a loud noise suddenly came from behind him. He turned his head sharply and saw a man leaping high up, with a magic spear condensed in his hand. At this distance, he had no chance of dodging. It's over. Mordo's pupils shrank rapidly. Get out! At the critical moment, Wang Meng grabbed the person in front of him and threw him with brute force. This actually knocked the enemy behind Mordo out together. Because of being knocked out, the spear also deviated in direction. It rubbed Mordo's waist and pierced through, piercing the ground with a bang. Boom! The ground suddenly cracked, the wooden floor rolled up, and countless wooden thorns flew away. The spear shaft kept shaking, making a buzzing sound, and dust flew up for a while. Modu, be careful! Wang was about to open his mouth to warn, when the light of the dimensional gate suddenly flashed behind him. His pupils shrank rapidly, and a man rushed towards the dimensional gate and pounced on him. The 2 rolled down the stairs directly to the first floor. This time, Wang couldn't help but gasp and groan in pain. These guys are not easy to deal with. They were all disciples here before. But they didn't expect that they all joined Kaecilius in the darkness. He suddenly turned over from the ground. Although he was fat, his movements were particularly agile at this time, alive. The round shield in his hand emitting golden light directly knocked the 2 people around him away. But even so, the man pounced on him in an instant and entangled the king. And now the most embarrassed one is Stephen. He ran quickly in the corridor of the temple, and after getting a little distance away, he clasped his hands together suddenly, and cast a spell quickly, with a fiery red light flashing in his hands. In this kind of corridor terrain, the most suitable thing is fire. But just as he was about to release the fire, Kaecilius had already quickly come in front of him. Just a sudden swing of the knife directly interrupted Stephen's spell. What's wrong with this guy? Stephen couldn't help but curse. Kaecilius was extremely powerful, and he didn't even use any magic. The magic sword alone was enough to beat him so hard that he couldn't raise his head. He barely dodged the knife, and the magic whip in both hands suddenly wrapped around the magic sword, trying to forcibly take the weapon away. But before he could react, he was kicked away. No, I am no match for this guy. Stephen gritted his teeth, got up and ran towards the depths of the temple. He wanted to hold Kaecilius back now. As long as Wang dealt with the others, he would surely come to support him. Kaecilius looked at the fleeing Steve, with a half-smile on his face. He stretched out his right hand suddenly, pulled it back, and at the same time rotated his palm clockwise. The sides of the corridor were shattered quickly, and the sides of the room walls were constantly splitting and moving. The bricks under Stephen's feet were like a treadmill runway, sliding backwards quickly, bringing his body towards Kaecilius. Steven's scalp was about to explode, and he ran forward with all his strength. But the figure kept moving towards Kaecilius. So this is the mirror space. Hood, who was floating behind Kaecilius the whole time, couldn't help but nod slightly and sighed when he saw this scene. It must be said that the practical effect of this magic is really great. Although there are many dark magics that can also change reality, they are still very different from the mirror space. Hod, come and help. Steven ran and looked back, and suddenly found that Hod had been floating behind Kaecilius. What was even more incredible was that Kaecilius seemed to be completely unaware of his existence. What was even more puzzling was that other people did not bother Hod. It was as if Hod was an invisible man at this moment. This scene was really weird. Don't worry. Hod moved instantly and stood directly at the edge of the mirror space, carefully looking at the space. And he was clearly standing in front of Kaecilius on the right, but Kaecilius seemed not to see him. The moment Kaecilius appeared, Hod used his psychic ability immediately. Ignore him, or even don't realize his existence at all. Help me, Steven shouted without caring about his own face. This guy was still watching the show at this time. Watch out behind you. Hod waved his hand without even looking up, carefully looking around, and at the same time he did not forget to remind him. Buzz. Steven's hair stood up immediately, and he turned sideways. And it was precisely because of this action that the magic sword almost passed by him. In other words, if Hod hadn't reminded him, he would probably have lost a kidney right now. Steven cursed angrily, and stretched out his right hand, also using space magic. The room twisted like a donut, and suddenly turned his angle to the ceiling. Because the floor was constantly retreating, he and Kaecilius happened to miss each other. Before Steven could breathe a sigh of relief, he saw Kaecilius spread out his hands leisurely. With a wave of air, his eyes widened instantly. This was clearly preparing to use space folding. He turned his head suddenly, his pupils contracted rapidly, and then he slammed into the space fold. The whole person was hit hard. He fell to the ground. He really felt like his life was about to be taken away. He almost bled profusely. Buzz. Before he could get up, a loud bang made his scalp numb. He rolled on the spot to avoid the magic sword that was chopped down. Just as he was about to get up, Kaecilius had already arrived in front of him. Kaecilius' blurry magic sword stabbed straight at Steven. Steven gritted his teeth, but before the round shield in his hands could solidify, it was already in front of him. His pupils shrank into a slit at this time. Steven. Wong was so anxious when he saw this that he yelled at Steven. But it was too late to rescue him. As for Mordo, he could only watch the next scene. At this critical moment, the entire space twisted and folded instantly. The surrounding things forced a transparent plane between the two people. In just an instant, the two were separated. Not only that, the corridor also rotated and moved at this time. Space magic. Steven got up from the ground, looking at Kaecilius above his head and exclaimed in disbelief. At this moment, he and Kaecilius were clearly separated by a plane. This was clearly a mirror space. His head was buzzing, and he had no idea what was going on. He subconsciously looked around. After all, this might be Master Ji Yi. But when he turned his head, the expression on his face was dull. He saw a person floating in the air, his hands emitting a faint golden light, and everything around him was constantly rotating and twisting. Just like the pages of a book, it made a rustling sound. The walls and windows were changing, twisting and spinning rapidly. For a moment, everyone was stunned when they saw this scene. The person who used this move was actually Hood. Steven's eyes widened. How on earth did he learn this? Could it be? He suddenly remembered that this guy hadn't made a move just now. He was actually observing the mirror space. He even learned it directly. What on earth is going on? Modu's eyes widened. He couldn't imagine why this person could use the mirror space. If he really learned it just now, he was simply a rare magic genius in hundreds of years. He originally thought that Hod couldn't help at all. But he didn't expect to be slapped in the face so soon. Get away from me. Wong burst out with all his strength, and with a punch from the light shield in his right hand, he knocked the last enemy in front of him away. When he was about to look at Steven in a hurry, he saw this scene. This guy's talent is too terrifying. Although he had seen Hood display his talent before, he thought that this would at least require books or scrolls. But from the situation just now, just by seeing the other party cast a spell once, he has figured out how the mirror space is used. This kind of talent can even be said to be unheard of, because it is very difficult to learn magic through the other party's spell. Even the simplest magic is difficult to learn through casting. But Hood did it. Not only that, but he succeeded in just one use. As this guy, a disciple of Ancient One, Kaecilius, who was standing above, frowned and looked at Hood with a puzzled look. He remembered that he had never seen this person before, and he had never even heard of him. But this person could actually use the mirror space, which was not right at all. Moreover, he suddenly noticed that he seemed to have ignored this person all along. If Hood had not released the mirror space, he might not even have noticed Hood at all. Mirror space, is that all? It's not very strong. Hood looked at his hands and murmured subconsciously. Just now when he was observing the mirror space, it was as if something had occurred to him. He only had a flash of inspiration and understood how to cast this spell. It was just much weaker than he had imagined. However, he was not too disappointed. After all, the Book of Vishandi only recorded white magic and defensive magic. The spells recorded can basically only be used for defense and are difficult to be used for offense. So this mirror space is actually nothing more than to protect oneself and the things around him. This guy, Wong and the others were shocked when they heard the muttering. They wanted to learn the mirror space, but they didn't know how much time they had wasted before they could barely get started. But now, Hood understood the key points after just one look. And from his every move just now, it can be seen that Hood can already control the mirror space very skillfully. Who are you? Kaecilius looked up at the figure floating in the air, frowned and asked. Because this person's appearance was too strange, it stands to reason that with his strength, he would not ignore others. But all this happened. Did you stay up too late and your eyesight is not good? Hood raised his head and looked at Kaecilius, with a half-smile on his lips. Kaecilius's face became particularly ugly when he heard it. Looking at Hood's indifferent expression, this was clearly a humiliation to him. Although I don't know how this young man did it, there is no fear in his eyes. Although he has mastered the mirror space, it is still far from black magic. Young man, you shouldn't interfere in a battle that doesn't belong to you. Kaecilius waved his right hand, and the fluctuation of the magic sword made the air twist slightly. The next moment, he suddenly jumped up, and the entire mirror space changed at this time. It was as if he was wandering in gravity, and he arrived in front of Hood in an instant. A ferocious look emerged in his eyes. Although he didn't know who this person was, this young man's talent was extremely strong, so he must not be allowed to grow up. You better watch your own limits. Hood rolled his eyes when he saw Kaecilius jumping high. With a flick of his finger, Kaecilius hit the rotating wall in the mirror space like a discus. You are so weak, and you dare to attack me. Hood looked at the enemies in front of him with disdain, as if he was looking at a disgusting insect. He really felt that these guys were too weak. If he didn't want to learn more magic, he would have sent them to hell long ago. Kaecilius struggled to get up and gave orders to his men. Buzz. With the order, the 4 men beside him ran towards Hood, 2 on the left and 2 on the right. Their hands were still emitting golden light, and the next second, they all pulled out magic whips. The moment they surrounded Hood, the magic whips in their hands hesitantly swept towards Hood's hands and feet. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. With the sound of breaking through the air, the 4 magic whips actually tied Hood's hands and feet directly. And they pulled hard at the same time. Hood was pulled up and suspended in the air as if he was about to be torn into pieces by 5 horses. Hurry up and help. Modu's pupils were about to burst when he saw this scene. He was about to rush forward, but Wong stopped him directly. Don't worry. Wong had clearly noticed the smile on Hood's face. Although he didn't know what Hood's trump card was, Wong was sure that the people favored by Ji would never lose to these guys. Bosat's thunder. Kaecilius seized the opportunity, and purple lightning flashed between his hands. He suddenly jumped high and pushed his palms towards the tied-up Hood. Dazzling lightning burst out from his palms in an instant. It was like a dark purple dragon roaring towards Hood. When the lightning rushed towards Hood, some cracks appeared in the surrounding air. It even tore out another space. Hodder. Stephen's eyes widened, and he couldn't help but sweat. Huh. Hodder smiled and turned his head to look at the four people. Just a glance, the four people secretly felt that something was wrong. The next second, a huge force came from the whips in their hands. Hodder pulled hard, and the four whips that bound the limbs were instantly shattered by the huge force. In the blink of an eye, he suddenly raised his hand to catch the dark purple lightning, turning it into dust and dissipating it. Stephen and others were dumbfounded. If they were not mistaken just now, Hodder seemed to have caught the boss at thunder with just one hand. It's so scary. What kind of monster is this kid? Wang's voice became a little trembling at this moment. Although he could take the boss at thunder, it would definitely not be so easy. What's more, this is not just a boss at thunder, and Hood actually broke the four magic whips directly. All this has caused a great impact on his world. Mordo, who was not far away, almost popped his eyes out. He knew very well how terrifying Kaecilius' strength was. But this all-out attack was solved by Hood. At this time, he finally understood why Stephen and Wang said that this man's strength was unusually strong. You look pretty good. At this moment, Hood's mouth corners raised, and his hands made the same movements as Kaecilius just now. When Kaecilius saw Hood's movement, his face suddenly changed. He had vaguely guessed Hood's thoughts. Impossible. How is this possible? He was comforting himself in his heart. After all, it was impossible to learn the thunder of Basart without studying books. And the next second, a flash of lightning flashed in the palm of Hood's hand. Kaecilius widened his eyes, and fear spread rapidly in his heart. He couldn't understand how this was done, because it was completely different from what he imagined. This was just a glance. You know, it took him more than half a year to learn the thunder of Basart. And what frightened him even more was that the power contained in the thunder of Basart was much greater than what he released. Kaecilius didn't even have time to react, and was directly swept away by the huge lightning. He actually learned it. Stephen looked at Hood not far away, with mixed feelings in his eyes. He didn't even know how Hood learned it. You know, it was just a glance. He learned it with just one glance. Although Wang thought Hood would fight back, he never thought that Hood would use his own method to fight back. And he could clearly feel that the boss at thunder that Hood just released was much more powerful than Kaecilius. How could this be? Impossible. Mordo was shocked and ashamed at the same time. Unheard of. He had seen countless people with extraordinary talents, but he had never seen someone as amazing as Horde. Just one glance, he had already succeeded in stealing Horde's skills. Cough, cough, cough. Kaecilius weakly climbed up from the ground. Many parts of his body had been charred by the electricity. He looked at Hood not far away, his eyes full of anger. Because he simply couldn't figure out how this was done. Do you have any interesting tricks? Show them to me. Hood narrowed his eyes, raised the corners of his mouth, and there was a hint of laziness in his voice. He was not in a hurry to deal with Kaecilius. After all, he might be able to learn a few more interesting tricks. This would be faster than learning from books. Kaecilius got up quickly as if he had gone mad. The dark circles around his eyes became even darker at this moment. He suddenly wiped his hands in the air and pulled hard. The original temple suddenly opened from the middle. Everything around them was changing rapidly, and then they were standing on the main road between the bustling cities. What was even more shocking was that above their heads was an identical city. This is the mirror space. Stephen's face was solemn. Although he also knew how to use the mirror space, he was not as smooth as Kaecilius. Although Hood also learned it, he didn't think he would be better than Kaecilius in subtle operations. This terrain is too advantageous for Kaecilius. Kill them. Kaecilius roared, waving his right hand violently. His men rushed forward, condensing various weapons in their hands, and rushed towards Horde quickly. Backquote. It's always like this, it's boring. Hodder shook his head. He thought he would come up with something new, but he didn't expect it to be this one. He was about to stretch out his right hand and wipe out all these people. Buzz. A golden light flashed quickly, and Ji Yuyi appeared in front of him in an instant. At this time, Ji Yuyi was wearing a yellow robe, with indifference and coldness in her eyes. She slowly raised her left hand and pinched 3 fingers fiercely. The whole world spun instantly, as if a building was about to collapse. The men fell quickly toward the ground. When they hit the ground, they screamed in pain. Master. Stephen and the others were about to step forward, but they suddenly found that the cunning road was directly divided. Hypocrisy. Kaecilius gritted his teeth and cursed when he saw Ancient One appear. The men who got up gathered whips and lashed at Ancient One fiercely. But when the whip touched Ancient One, it not only did not hurt her, but even exploded directly. Kaecilius, Ce gritted his teeth, condensed a magic sword in his hand, and rushed towards Gu. The magic sword in his hand also slashed upward again. Although his attack was very swift, Gu was able to dodge his attack with extremely calm movements. At the same time, his right hand was still casting spells, and the building in the mirror space was like a crusher that continued to spread. It directly engulfed Kaecilius's men one by one, and only the sound of crushing and screaming could be heard. But at this moment, Kaecilius' right hand suddenly condensed a ball of light. This ball of light suddenly blew towards Gu's face with a strong wind. This hurricane instantly lifted Gu's hood, and a red mark appeared on Gu's forehead. When this scene appeared, Stephen and others were stunned. Because they recognized it at a glance. This is clearly the mark of Dormammu. They never thought that the supreme sorcerer used the power of dark magic. Master, this is, Stephen shouted in disbelief with a trembling voice. I used Dormammu's power. Although the Ancient One's tone was particularly calm when he said this again. But a trace of haze remained in the hearts of the three people. They originally thought that the Ancient One, Nuo Qian Zhao, had been using Vishanti's magic. But she actually used black magic. This even made them struggle in their hearts. Kaecilius caught the moment when the Ancient One was stunned, and a hint of joy flashed in his eyes. His body suddenly pressed down and leaned forward, and at the same time, a magic sword was created in his left hand. It stabbed towards the chest of the Ancient One. Gu. When Hod saw this, he flew towards Gu. But the next second, a strong wind suddenly blew in front of Hod. This old bald guy is looking for death. Hod knew very well that this strong wind was clearly released by Ancient One. He looked at Ancient One's meaningful expression and frowned slightly. The next second, the sharp blade in Kaecilius's hand pierced through Ancient One's abdomen. It actually worked. Even Kaecilius himself couldn't believe it. It was incredible. Seeing Stephen and the others rushing over, he didn't pursue them. Instead, he opened the dimensional door to let his men escape. Master. Stephen quickly stepped forward and hugged Ancient One. He tried to stop the bleeding in a panic. Mordo and Wong looked at the scene in front of them with mixed emotions on their faces. Whether it was the mark of Dormammu or everything that was happening now, their minds went blank. Don't even think about leaving. Stephen watched Kaecilius about to leave, and roared in a trembling voice. The surrounding buildings quickly swept towards Kaecilius. But Kaecilius directly moved another building to stop him. Stephen and his friends could only watch Kaecilius about to escape. Stand back. Hodder stood in front of everyone, and swung his right hand violently, shattering the mirror space with a punch. Instantly, an extremely terrifying force gushed out. The huge force caused the prosperous city to collapse instantly. The buildings, streets and roads collapsed one by one like pieces of broken glass. Crack, crack, crack. Bang. The broken glass suddenly turned into powdery starlight all over the sky. The mirror space collapsed instantly, and everyone fell into the void. A strong sense of weightlessness came instantly. The next second, everything around changed instantly, and everyone returned to the temple. Kaecilius just jumped up, and when he landed, his head suddenly buzzed. He couldn't help but feel dazed. What happened just now? He turned around suddenly, and when he saw Hood, fear spread along his back like a creeper. If I saw it right, Hood just shattered the mirror space with just one punch. What kind of monster is this? How is this possible? Although the interior of the mirror space is determined by the releaser, in order to destroy it, the energy bursting out from the inside must be at least dozens of times greater than the user's ability. So, it is basically impossible to destroy it. Originally thought that this man named Hod was just very talented in magic. But he never expected that this power was far beyond his imagination. Moreover, he finally understood now that the other party had actually been playing with him all the time. The reason why he didn't kill him at the beginning was that he was just treating him like an ant. Because no matter how he struggled, it was absolutely impossible to hurt him at all. He lowered his head in despair. The pupils became extremely dim at this moment. The corners of Wang's eyes kept twitching, and his expression was no longer shock, but fear. He was just next to him, he could even vaguely feel the power of that punch. When that punch was thrown, the power contained in it seemed to be able to destroy the world. And this was only the power in the flesh, and no other energy was used. Baron Mordo's expression turned pale and blue, and in the end he did not say anything more. He understood that from the beginning, he was like a clown. It didn't matter whether the opponent had the Book of Vishanti or not. Moreover, the Book of Vishanti focused on defense and white magic, and the opponent obviously didn't need this kind of power at all. The reason why the opponent wanted to learn was probably just out of curiosity. Besides, the opponent's talent was that he could learn it with just one glance. Unless all mages never use magic in their lives, it would be a matter of time for Hood to learn it. Cough cough cough. Kaecilius turned around and looked at Hood with an embarrassed look, his mouth slightly opened, and after a long pause he said, "Who are you?" Although he always knew that he was no match for Ancient One, in his eyes, Ancient One was already an extremely powerful being on Earth. The appearance of Hood tore his thoughts to pieces. He couldn't understand why he would meet such a powerful person. But he had never even heard of this person. "Are you curious?" Huoda looked gentle, and continued in a light tone, "I am just a person you can never reach in your life. So that's how it is. It seems that I really don't blame myself for losing." Kaecilius knew very well that he couldn't escape. He just raised his head and looked straight at Hood. It seemed that in this way, he could imprint Hood's face in his mind forever. Even in the next life, he didn't want to offend such a strong man again. Should it be like this? Hodder put his hands together and pulled hard, and a transparent magic sword appeared in his hand. Compared with other people's magic swords, the one in his hand was obviously more transparent. Even if you don't look carefully, you can't see that Hodder is holding a blade that is 1.5 meters long. He walked slowly towards Kaecilius with elegant steps. It was as if he was strolling in the back garden of his own home, but the closer he got to Kaecilius, the more he could feel the terrible oppression. This oppression made his body tremble uncontrollably, but he did not retreat or run away. Because he knew that no matter how he ran, he would never be able to escape. "By the way, do you have anything else to say?" Hod slowly placed the magic sword on his neck, as if asking him if he wanted to eat. Kaecilius opened his mouth and hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I hope there really is another world after death," he thought, looking up at the ceiling, as if he could see the sky. The reason why he did whatever it takes to gain power was not because he wanted immortality. But Dormammu once promised him that if he could let him come back, then he would be able to have his wife and daughter back with him. But now it seems that I can only go down to see them myself. Sizzle. With a burst of coldness, blood spurted out like a fountain. For a moment, the walls and the ground were soaked in this blood. Kaecilius fell to the ground, but there was no fear on his face anymore, only a smile. It was as if he really met the person he loved in another world. "Be a good person in your next life." Hod shook his head, and the magic sword in his hand slowly disappeared. He looked back with a smile on his face and said, "Sorry, I may have to trouble you to clean the floor." "It's okay, thank you very much." Stephen didn't care about anything else, and drew a circle with his right hand, and a golden dimensional door opened. From this end, it was clear that the other end was in the hospital. When the golden dimensional door opened, Stephen immediately rushed into the hospital holding Ji Yuyi. "Master, you must hold on." After Stephen arrived at the hospital, he grabbed a doctor and asked, "Where is the emergency room?" The doctor next to him was stunned when he saw several people coming out of this thing, but after reacting, he hurriedly took Stephen to the emergency room. Several people stood outside the emergency room, but in less than 10 minutes, the lights in the emergency room went out. The doctor in a white coat walked out with a dim look in his eyes. "The patient has lost a lot of blood and is now dead." Stephen obviously couldn't accept this result. His eyes suddenly turned red. Tears kept flowing down his face, and his legs were shaking. He stumbled back a few steps and sat directly on the iron bench in the hospital. It was clear from his shrugged shoulders that Stephen was now emotionally broken. "Your teacher is over there." Hodder walked to Stephen's side and sat down, gently patting his back. The next second, both of them left their bodies at the same time. Stephen was stunned at first, and then he seemed to think of something. He turned his head and saw Ancient One in a yellow robe standing in front of the French window of the hospital, with his hands behind his back, looking at the bustling city. You still haven't changed your mind. Hod sighed and shook his head helplessly. In fact, he could have saved Ancient One, but he knew that Ancient One didn't want him to do that. Otherwise, he wouldn't have cast a gust of wind to block his way. The reason why the other party was unwilling was probably because of the Dormammu mark on his forehead. Death is not the end for me, but a kind of salvation. Ji Yuyi slowly turned her head, looked at the two people and spoke, and a smile appeared on her face for the first time in a long time. Now she has delivered her final answer very well. Although she also knows that this is a big blow to Stephen. But it is impossible to continue like this. But you. Stephen gritted his teeth and wanted to say something unwillingly. But Ji Yuyi interrupted him directly. I have lived long enough, and I have seen enough things, that is enough. To be honest, she has not felt so relaxed for a long time. After all, she is very tired after bearing pressure for a long time. Almost there, Ji Yuyi looked up at the sky, as if he remembered something, and looked at Hood with an earnest look. Hood, I ask you to be Stephen's godfather. She knew very well that Hood's strength had far exceeded her imagination. It would take a long time to wait for Stephen to grow up safely. But if Hood was there, then all this would definitely not be a problem. What? Impossible. This is absolutely impossible. I would never let someone younger than me be my godfather. Stephen, who was originally sad, suddenly raised his head and roared with an unwilling tone. It was too much to let such a person be his godfather. It's too unreasonable. Stephen, did you not understand what I meant? Ji Yuyi shouted in a low voice with displeasure. Ji Yuyi's voice made Stephen's expression stunned, because this was the first time he saw Ji Yuyi so angry. I beg you, Hod. Ji Yuyi turned to look at Hod again, with a little pleading in her eyes. Although she had put down the heavy responsibility on her shoulders, she was still reluctant to let go. After all, this was something she had insisted on for her whole life, and she could only continue to protect it if Stephen grew up enough. To read the violent novel, go to Philu Novel Network. But obviously, this would take enough time. Stephen wanted to open his mouth to refute, but seeing Ji Yuyi's serious expression, he finally shut up. Well, I think it seems quite interesting, I promise you. A look of evil interest emerged on Hood's face. He also thought it was quite troublesome. After all, he had to protect an uncle. And this uncle also liked to show off, which made him a little irritated just thinking about it. But on second thought, it seemed that it was not bad to let Stephen call him father. Stephen looked at seeing the playful look on Hood's face. How could she not know what Hood was thinking? It was obvious that he wanted to hear him call him father. He was already inferior to Hood in every way, but now he has become his father. Who could accept this? But when he saw Ji Yuyi's expression, and thought that this was Ji Yuyi's instruction, he nodded helplessly in the end. Ji Yuyi smiled after seeing this scene. She turned her head slowly, turned into a golden light and flew straight into the sky. Stephen looked at the disappearing golden light and sighed helplessly. Hood brought Stephen back to his original body and then said, "It's time to go." "Where are you going?" Stephen raised his head, and the sadness in his heart was much less. Because he could see that this was Ancient One's own wish. If that was the case, then he had no reason to stop it. Let's go find Dormammu and tell him to stop harassing the Earth. Hod shrugged his shoulders, spread his hands and said as a matter of course. After all, Dormammu must still be trying to deal with the Earth. He didn't want to rush to Stephen every other day. After all, just thinking about it was exhausting. It's better to solve it directly, so as not to be harassed by the trivial things of the dimensional demon invading reality every day. Stephen was stunned. He couldn't understand why Hood would say such a thing. He was the dimensional demon god. Asking him not to disturb the Earth was like asking a dog not to urinate or defecate anywhere. Why are you so surprised? Do you want to go or not? After saying this, Hood rolled his eyes and continued, "By the way, I am your father." Seeing Stephen's expression that was more uncomfortable than eating shit, Hood's face was filled with smiles. "What were you doing just now?" At this moment, not far away, Mordo and Wong came over with sad faces. They had also noticed that Huod and the others had entered the state of spirits. Just now, Master Gu Yi. After Stephen told everything that had just happened, he continued, and Hod said he was going to go find the dimensional demon to play with. When these words came out, both of them were stunned. What kind of lewd words were these? Going to find the dimensional demon, what's the difference between this and actively seeking death? I absolutely disagree with this. Wong immediately stood up and vetoed it. It was not something a human could do to find the dimensional demon. Although I know you are very powerful, the dimensional demon is an extremely powerful being after all. Modu felt a chill on his back just by mentioning this word. He never thought that he would see someone so brave in his life. Are you sure you don't want to go? Then I'll go. Hod's mouth curled up, he was quite looking forward to it. After all, he had only heard of the demon god of this dimension, but had never seen it. It was just the right opportunity to go over and take a look. As for who is in danger, it is still uncertain. After speaking, he waved his right hand violently and opened the door to the outside of the real dimension. Looking around, the world of another dimension was dark, and all kinds of strange lights and planets were floating everywhere. The gloomy black fog filled it, but these all looked strange. This was the first time that the other three had seen the appearance of the dark dimension. But after feeling the evil breath coming from it, the expressions of these people suddenly became extremely ugly. If you don't want to go, forget it. I'll go. Hood didn't hesitate and walked straight into the dimensional gate. The remaining three looked at each other for a moment, but still gritted their teeth and followed. When they entered the dark dimension, the strongest feeling was darkness. Then there were countless small planets floating around, all of which were shining with bright starlight. But this kind of light was dizzying, and you could even vaguely see some tentacles floating. Compared with the vigilant expressions of the three people, Hood seemed to be on a spring outing. Not only was he not afraid at all, he even looked relaxed. The reason why he was so fearless was entirely because the power of the phoenix he now possessed was enough to make Dormammu afraid. I'm betting my life on you, you'd better be sure. Stephen gritted his teeth and spoke word by word. He didn't want to come in once and then stay in this hellhole forever. I'm kind of regretting coming into this place. Wong gritted his teeth, the fat on his face trembling slightly. He really regretted why he came in for no reason. Not to mention Mordo, his face was full of despair. We're dead. After all, after coming in, they could all clearly feel the oppression coming from this space. Don't worry, Hodder spread his hands and said in a comforting tone. We are just here to warn Dormammu, not to kill him. Question mark, question mark, question mark. Stephen and the others were speechless. Is there any difference? They are going to die anyway. Rumble. With a strange loud noise, the surrounding planets floated more violently. Although these planets are not big, they all contain various colors of light. This is a sense of oppression that is difficult to describe in words. After hearing this sound, several people couldn't help but look back. What came into view was an extremely huge eye. This eye was glowing with purple light, and it was even bigger than the small planet they were standing on. When they saw this scene, the expressions of Stephen and the other two froze, as if even their hearts had stopped. Is this kind of monster really something that humans can defeat? If it wasn't too late, they would even want to turn around and run. The purple eye slowly retreated, and as the purple eye got farther and farther away, they suddenly saw another purple eye appear in this dark universe. Then, a huge and hideous face slowly appeared in front of them. This is a huge humanoid creature, but his face is like a walking. The surface of the body was like a solidified brown sea wave. There were countless huge pits, and the edges of the body could vaguely see traces of fiery red, which seemed to be surging like lava. The terrifying eyes were staring at them intently, which was a sense of oppression they had never felt before. At this moment, they finally understood how big the gap was between themselves and the demon god of this dimension. Intruders, you have entered the dark dimension without permission and will be punished irreversibly. Dormammu opened his terrifying mouth and spoke in a loud voice. It was obvious from his tone that he was extremely angry at the moment. He had just felt this group of invaders. As long as he was in the dark dimension, he could feel everything in the dimension. Wait, you are from Kamar Taj. Dormammu's terrifying eyes widened instantly. He never thought that the people of Kamar Taj would come here to die. So what? Steven gritted his teeth and stood up. Now that he was here, there was no reason to retreat. Ha ha ha, you tiny ants, you actually dare to enter my dimension to seek death. You are courting your own death. Dormammu laughed in a low voice. He was extremely excited now. He hated the Kamar-Taj people to the core. Since someone came to his doorstep to be slaughtered, he was naturally in a good mood. If it weren't for you, the Ancient One would never have died. Steven was extremely disgusted with Dormammu. If it weren't for Dormammu, how could things turn out like this? He even began to accumulate power unconsciously in his hands, and a golden halo surrounded his hands. What? Ancient One is dead. After hearing the news, Dormammu raised his head slightly and laughed out loud. This deafening laughter even made their eardrums tremble slightly. Even the ground on the planet was shaking with this laughter. Young man, are you here to bring good news? For Dormammu, this is really the best news. As long as the Ancient One dies, there will be no one on Earth who can compete with him. Looking at Dormammu's smug look, the expressions of Steven and others became even uglier. Tell me, you stupid little reptiles, how do you want to die? Dormammu approached the head and asked these guys who were like ants. But no one spoke, but looked at him with resentment. But for Dormammu, this was nothing more than a challenge to his majesty. He just thought about it, and countless purple lights rushed down from the sky and quickly hit the 4 people present. In an instant, countless smoke and dust rose up, and huge energy burst out in this tiny planet. Boring reptiles. Dormammu finished all this and was about to disappear into the darkness. But at this moment, he opened his eyes in surprise. There was still an expression of disbelief in his eyes, because he clearly felt that the 4 little reptiles were still alive. As the smoke and dust dissipated, he saw that the few people were standing there intact. The man in the front raised his mouth corners, with a playful look on his face. So, is that all you have? Hod put his hands in his pockets and looked at Dormammu with a smile. He had to admit that he was really surprised when he saw Dormammu for the first time. It was not because he was scared, but because this thing looked too weird. He would believe it even if someone was doing real estate development on it. After all, the trenches made him feel physically and mentally uncomfortable just by looking at them. Tiny reptile, how dare you challenge me? Dormammu didn't expect that these guys could withstand his casual attack. And this guy who was like an ant in his eyes actually dared to resist. His eyes condensed, and the stones on the surrounding small planets formed huge stone pillars and shot towards Horde and others quickly. Stand behind me. Facing all this, Hood calmly pulled out a hand and just waved it in the sky. The dark red barrier instantly surrounded the 4 of them. The moment the stone pillars touched the barrier, they turned directly into countless powders and fragments. Dormammu was even more angry. It was the first time he saw an ant that was so durable. Even this move could be easily blocked. What made him even more angry was the look in this man's eyes. Although he was smiling, it was more of disdain and mockery. Roar! His mouth opened slightly, and the terrifying purple light continued to appear in his mouth. If the surrounding planets get even slightly closer to this energy, they will be annihilated by this terrifying purple energy. Be careful. Wang's forehead was covered with sweat. Although he was not fighting, the sense of oppression at this time had reached its peak. This guy is definitely going to attack with all his strength. Baron Mordo was also sweating. Although Horde had blocked it just now, it was obviously not Dormammu's true strength. What's more, this guy was already angry. Needless to say, it was also a powerful attack. The bad breath from this guy's mouth can condense into a purple ball. Hodder still had an extremely indifferent look on his face, and even yawned out of boredom. Can it be faster? Does this thing need to charge up? It has to be said that Hood's words were full of ridicule. Even the people behind him did not expect that Hood would speak to attract firepower at this time. Bang! In an instant, the purple beam of light spewed out from Dormammu's mouth, and in just a blink of an eye, it had surrounded all of them. The land on the planet was constantly cracking, and even other asteroids not far away were invaded by this purple beam of light. In this dark dimension, this beam of light seemed so dazzling, just like the pillar of creation. It even penetrated several planets directly without any sign of stopping. As the purple light stopped, a smile appeared in Dormammu's eyes. This group of annoying flies finally died. But at this moment, his eyes suddenly dulled. Because under this power that can easily destroy the planet, there is actually a small piece of land floating. And the 4 people on it, aren't they Hood and others? How is this possible? Dormammu gritted his teeth, his voice full of disbelief. He had never thought that this group of tiny insects could withstand such a huge energy. After all, this kind of energy is really too terrifying. In a cloud of dust, Hood wrapped in a red barrier waved his hand and walked out with a frown. No, you've been tickling me for so long. Forget it, you guys just watch the show from the sidelines. After saying this, Hood swung his right hand violently, and the broken planet below instantly flew to another planet. At the same time, there was a red barrier around them, which clearly showed that they were determined to face Dormammu. I have to say, Aunt, your strength is indeed good. Although Dormammu was very unhappy, he had to admit that this was much stronger than he had imagined. Actually, yours is not bad, but it looks a little disgusting. Faced with Dormammu's answer, Horde looked at the huge figure with a smile. Is this the strength of Hood? Steven said in a daze. He finally understood why Master Ancient One insisted on Hood being his godfather. This guy's strength was too terrifying. He had never heard of anyone who could fight Dormammu. And he looked calm and nonchalant throughout the whole process. As if he didn't care about anything. I finally understand how big the gap between people is. It's more than just bigger than that between people and dogs. Wang's eyes kept twitching, because Huoda was too arrogant at this time. And judging from Huoda's expression, this has not started to get serious at all. It can even be said that he feels that Huoda is just like visiting a scenic spot. Dormammu didn't continue to talk nonsense. He hadn't been so angry for a long, long time. Countless energy swords condensed in the void, carrying extremely terrifying energy and shooting towards Hood. The speed of these energy swords was as fast as light, and it was impossible to capture them with the naked eye. One could only see the afterimage after shooting. Not only that, when these energy swords shot at Hood, they would even explode continuously. At the same time, other lightsabers formed in the sky. Looking around, the dark universe seemed to be surrounded by these dense energy swords. In the darkness, Dormammu's power was almost endless. The energy swords in the sky were like galaxies, although they were of different colors. But one thing is the same, that is, Steven and the other 2 could not withstand any of them. Steven's Adam's apple rolled up and down, and he said in a trembling voice, "Are you sure Hood will be okay?" "I'm not sure, but it should be, maybe, nothing will happen." Wang answered the question tremblingly. If it was Haja, then it goes without saying that they would be left here. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but have a headache. Although it was indeed a scene that he would never see in his lifetime, this scene was too shocking. And if the estimate was correct, it was only less than 10 seconds. Hundreds of millions of energy swords had been shot out from the void. When it stopped, even Dormammu subconsciously breathed a sigh of relief. Although his energy was infinite, it did not mean that he would not feel tired. And with such an attack, the human could not possibly withstand it. But at this moment, Hood appeared with a faint red light. He moved his neck and said impatiently, "You can't even count as giving me a massage." Steven and the other 2 were completely confused now. They thought Hood might survive, but this was too easy. It felt like taking a bath after a massage. And this was Dormammu anyway. Is it really okay to be so casual? Dormammu's voice echoed in the dark dimension. The terrifying roar even caused the surrounding planets to show signs of breaking. "Look at you, why are you so angry?" Hodder raised his mouth, spread his hands and said, "If you don't agree, just keep going." Before Hodder finished speaking, countless purple hands grew out from different new stars. They quickly grabbed Hodder and wanted to whip the dark red shield on Hodder's body. "Okay, I don't like this." At this time, a fiery red light flashed in Hodder's eyes. He pulled his right hand out of his pocket and flicked it to both sides. The power of the phoenix rippled in the void. When the tentacles touched the power of the phoenix, they dissipated instantly. Turned into countless black powders. When this scene appeared, everyone was shocked. Is that the phoenix force? Dormammu was shocked. He had just clearly felt this power. This power was very familiar. It was the phoenix force. He knew very well that the Phoenix Force was one of the oldest and most powerful energy bodies in the universe. But he had never thought that the little reptile in front of him would actually possess such a terrifying power. At this moment, he finally understood why Horde was not afraid at all, because Horde relied on this terrifying power. Horde waved his hands, and his body suddenly began to stimulate extremely terrifying energy. The dark red light gushed out as if it had found a tilting mouth. The terrifying power and oppression made Dormammu a little afraid. What frightened him even more was that when the Phoenix Force began to overflow, this terrifying power actually began to annihilate the dark dimension, gradually decomposing everything into nothingness. Phoenix power. Steven was stunned at first, then suddenly realized, so that's why you are so talented. If that's the case, then everything can be explained. And the reason why Horde appeared here was because of the power of the Phoenix. This guy's body can actually withstand such a terrifying force. Wang's voice trembled, and his expression was extremely shocked. You know, the power of the Phoenix is very strong. It is not something that ordinary people can absorb. If the body is not strong enough, it may cause the body to be blown up by the power of the Phoenix. Not only that, it also has great risks when using it. But Horde seems to be able to control it freely. Dormammu noticed that the terrifying power of the Phoenix was annihilating the darkness. No, die. He tried to stop the Phoenix Force from invading the dark dimension. But when his energy touched the Phoenix Force, it turned into black particles. Oh, and this guy, just kill him. He was about to try to kill Horde when he thought of this, but he suddenly remembered that no matter what kind of attack he used, this guy would remain unscathed. Young man, you win. Dormammu looked at the dark dimension that was getting smaller and smaller, and even his voice began to tremble. Once he lost the dark dimension, he would only be eaten by other demons outside the dimension. Because all his power came from the black dimension. The Phoenix Force erodes the black dimension, which is of no benefit to him. After these words came out, Steven and others were shocked. This Dormammu actually took the initiative to beg for mercy. Dormammu looked up unwillingly and stared at the man in front of him. I promise you. Now he had no choice. Either he would fight to death with Horde. Obviously, there was no benefit for both sides. Taking a step back and compromising was the last option. Besides, the lifespan of humans was very short. At worst, it would not be too late to invade reality after the lifespan of this human was exhausted. Anyway, the lifespan of the dimensional demon god was almost endless. You made a smart choice. Hodder did not force Dormammu anymore. Although he was now strong enough to fight Dormammu, this place was the dark dimension. It was not good for him. Besides, his condition was very simple, just to make Dormammu stop disturbing reality. Watching Horder and his group about to leave, Dormammu could not help but let out a long sigh. Compared to him, this guy was more like a Dark Lord. Ding, you forced Dormammu into a deal. Get reward. Ancient Doomsday Bloodline Premium. Oh, my luck seems to be pretty good. Hod couldn't help but be a little surprised. After all, this Ancient Doomsday Bloodline is extremely terrifying. Ancient Doomsday Bloodline, high quality. A conditioned Ancient Doomsday Bloodline, free of impurities, can perfectly adapt to any human being, and will not have any rejection. He knew very well how terrifying this reward was. What is Ancient Doomsday? From the beginning, the most terrifying thing about Ancient Doomsday is that it can be resurrected infinitely. A monster that is almost immortal. Although it is still a long way behind the Silver Super. But its particularity is the most terrifying. Because Ancient Doomsday can constantly adapt to various environments and battles, and then begin to evolve continuously. In other words, if someone kills him with fire, his will have a straight rise in flame resistance after resurrection. So this is the most terrifying part of Ancient Doomsday. Compared to Captain America, I can spend a whole day with you. Ancient Doomsday is the bloodline that really keeps fighting. The almost invincible setting made Hood's heartbeat accelerate a little. Although he had the ability to heal and regenerate continuously when he got the Zodiac Talisman before. But this is very different from the Ancient Doomsday after all, and he can't adapt to it. Because if he can't adapt, he will be slaughtered again and again when he encounters a strong enemy. What makes him even more excited is that this Ancient Doomsday bloodline is a conditioned bloodline, which means he doesn't have to worry about his appearance changing. More importantly, there will be no side effects. Just when Horde was thinking about the reward, a pair of eyes were staring at him. He should be the strongest being on Earth, right? Stephen looked at Hood's dazed profile and thought to himself. It must be said that the battle just now left a very deep impression on him. This was an existence that made Dormammu beg for mercy, and this was in the Dark Dimension. He knew very well that in the Dark Dimension, Dormammu was equivalent to the Supreme God. No one could threaten him at all. He had been thinking just now, if it were him, what should he do to survive? Yes, that's right, he was just thinking about how to survive. There is only one way, and that is to reset time, but this can't cause any harm to Dormammu. And this is not completely without side effects. Although it can be resurrected all the time, it will still leave some traces. Not only Stephen, but even Wong and Mordo didn't come back to their senses for a long time. In fact, they also saw the power of the Phoenix just now, but they had never thought that someone would use the power of the Phoenix to make Dormammu bow his head. This kind of thing could even be said to be unheard of, but now it actually appeared in front of them. Wong looked at Horde with a complicated expression, and now he finally understood why Master Ancient One was so polite to Horde. Because this guy is a truly terrifying existence. If he is in a bad mood, he can even easily destroy the Earth. As for Mordo, let alone, his brain is now down. This power will peak at their Book of Byzanti. This is simply embarrassing. Although the Book of Byzanti is very precious, it is not a good thing for such an existence. This is someone who can agree with Dormammu's head. It is such an existence that would stay on the Earth honestly without any movement. In a sense, this can be regarded as good luck for the Earth. What's wrong? Do you have anything to say? Hood noticed that Stephen had been looking at him with a strange expression. The corners of his mouth rose, and he guessed that everything that happened today had brought a huge shock to Stephen. Stephen opened his mouth slightly, hesitated for a long time, and then shook his head slightly, no. After all, although he had a lot of questions to ask, he didn't know where to start. It can even be said that his mind was a mess. It was as if a 1-year-old child challenged boxing champion Tyson and beat Tyson to the ground. Hey, you don't even want to call me Godfather. Huoda spread his hands and pretended to be disappointed. I'm going back first. Godfather. Stephen's old face turned red, and he shouted with gritted teeth. Just shout. Anyway, this is such a powerful existence, and it's not a disadvantage to have such an awesome godfather. And he was still complaining in his heart, who knows if Hood is an old monster who has lived for hundreds of years. What's more, this time Hood really helped him a lot. At least they don't have to worry about Dormammu's invasion anymore. Hey, my good son. Hood looked at Doctor Strange calling him Godfather with a half smile, and suddenly felt relieved. Although his current strength is already extremely powerful, it is still very refreshing to see his former idol calling him Godfather. This is a kind of bad taste that is difficult to describe. Stephen looked at Hood's playful look, and he couldn't even raise his head. He is old, calling such a young man Godfather, even his teeth made a creaking sound. Well, the master asked Mr. Hood to be your godfather, there must be a reason for it. Wong grinned, walked to Stephen's side and patted his shoulder, then turned his head and looked. Mr. Hood, do you want to have a cup of tea? Although I don't know why Hood hides his strength so well. But from the action just now, it can be seen that Hood is also helping to protect the Earth. And he has always believed in the master's choice, so this must be the most correct choice. That's fine. Hood stretched his body. Although the dark dimension was quite novel. It was just like that after staying there for a long time. It was just a different dark space. If he was left there, he would probably go crazy in no time. Being strong is not everything, but enjoyment is the most important thing in the world. Sitting cross-legged in front of the antique tea table, the person in front of him was no longer Ancient One, but the king. He tried his best to learn from Ancient One's every move, and made tea with a little clumsiness. You should have a lot of questions, right? Hood took a sip of the tea, his lips slightly raised. He could see that Wong seemed to be hesitant to speak. Wong was stunned for a moment, then he showed an honest smile. No, although I want to know, I don't want to ask. It is enough for him to believe in the master, and it is enough for him to do his job well. Sometimes being too curious is not a good thing. After a while, Baron Mordo walked in from outside. He looked solemn and held a book in his hand. Mr. Hodder, this is the Book of Vishanti you need. He just went to get a copy of the Book of Vishanti because it is such a powerful existence. He is probably just curious about what is inside. Moreover, Hodder has helped them solve a big problem. Because the Ancient One is gone, the position of the Sorcerer Supreme is still vacant. If Hodder doesn't care, it is only a matter of time before Dormammu invades this universe. So taking out the Book of Vishanti is also his thank you gift and apology. This is the Book of Vishanti. Hod opened it and took a few glances, his eyes narrowed and the corners of his mouth rose. It must be said that the magic recorded in it was much more interesting than he had imagined. Although they were all white magic and defensive magic, they might work wonders sometimes. Stephen and Wong sat aside and acquiesced to Baron Mordo's decision. It's getting late. Hodder poured the fragrant tea from his cup. He drank it all. The tea is good, I like it very much, it's time to go back and rest. As he said that, he stood up and opened the dimensional door leading to the manor. He disappeared in the golden light. There are many houses in the manor. In addition to Hod's main house, there are also many single-family villas. These single-family villas are specially used to entertain guests. Considering Hela's specialness, Hela was given a villa by herself. Although Hela is indeed one of his own, he still feels a little uncomfortable. After all, Wanda has to come here occasionally, and maybe Gwen will come here in the future. In some ways, it must be a bit embarrassing. After all, the sound insulation of this house can't stop his energy. After returning to the house, Hod wanted to ask Wanda to come over and reminisce about the past. Of course, he didn't have any other little thoughts, but just wanted Wanda to chat with Lorna. After all, although Wanda met Lorna last time, because of the urgent time, she didn't chat for a few words and rushed back. But when he called Wanda, Wanda told him that she was busy with affairs and had no time at all. Hod was not surprised. After all, Baron Zemo should have caused a lot of trouble last time. The official department will definitely ask the Avengers to cooperate in investigating the case. Although she was not free to come, Wanda kept pestering him to make a video call all night. Hood seriously suspected that Wanda was afraid that he and Hela were having an affair. Thinking of this, the corners of his mouth rose slightly. If he really wanted to, then who said that it was only possible at night? However, he did not hang up the phone, but chatted with Wanda until late at night. Sometimes, in addition to physical communication, spiritual communication is also particularly important. The next morning, this ancient Doomsday is really interesting. Hodder lay on the recliner and felt the sun. He could clearly feel the changes in his body. After the sun shines on his skin, it even continues to penetrate into his body. The surface cells are also rapidly transforming to eliminate the side effects of ultraviolet rays. But in this case, it will be difficult for me to get a tan. Hodder sighed helplessly and shook his head. After all, the ancient Doomsday can avoid side effects, and tanning is also a side effect in the test. But this also brings other benefits, that is, you can feel that the ancient Doomsday will continue to nourish the body with the help of temperature. Starting from the inside to change the external potential, in the long run, the quality of the body will inevitably become stronger. Just as Hodder was feeling this leisurely life, his brows suddenly frowned slightly and he looked at the sky in the distance. I saw that the sky in the distance was suddenly covered with dark clouds, lightning and thunder. The deafening thunder was accompanied by the constant alternation of lightning. Who is it again? Hodder could faintly feel a force gathering at the location of the dark cloud. And this force was very familiar. Rainbow Bridge. The next second, Hod had already recalled the source of this energy. After all, when Thor appeared before, he felt this energy appearing in New York. And this was exactly the same energy that appeared last time. He couldn't help but stand up in surprise, squinting his eyes and looking into the distance. With just one glance, he could already see the sky more than 10 kilometers away. People from the divine realm. At the same time. Boss, abnormal energy fluctuations have been detected. Inside the Avengers base, Tony was biting a lollipop while signing the documents. He frowned when he heard this. Where is the exact location? How is the energy fluctuation? Tony frowned and asked. It's only been 2 days since he was able to catch his breath, and something unexpected happened again. Energy fluctuation level 3, high risk. Friday reported the current situation immediately and replied in a solemn voice. Okay. After Tony learned the location, he immediately sent a team to investigate. At the same time, on the plain outside the city, thousands of golden armored warriors lined up and stood in place. They were all wrapped in extremely terrifying momentum. From a distance, it looked like a piece of gold foil with golden light. In front of this army stood a figure. The golden armored warriors behind him all looked at this figure with reverence. It seemed that as long as this figure appeared, nothing could stop them. This figure was wearing armor, with white hair and beard, sitting on an 8-legged warhorse with a majestic body exuding an extremely terrifying aura. This was Odin. Thor, is this it? Odin asked calmly, pulling the reins of the 8-legged warhorse. Report to my father, Hela's breath is nearby. Thor frowned and felt it for a moment, then nodded with certainty. He was very familiar with Hela's breath, even if it was a little different, it must not be far away. Very good. Odin snorted coldly and jumped off his horse. As he clenched his right hand in the void, a golden light instantly appeared in his hand. When the golden light appeared, the surrounding trees and the ground fell in all directions like invisible forces. This is Odin's weapon, the Spear of Eternity. He suddenly raised the Spear of Eternity and slammed it hard on the ground. It was like a hot knife inserted into butter. The terrifying power spread rapidly under the ground. Boom! Surrounding the Spear of Eternity, the ground shattered and flew away. A golden air wave ripple swept around at the speed of a blink of an eye. For a time, the whole earth was shaking. Odin took a deep breath and roared with great majesty, Hela. The father of the gods has come, why don't you come and see him? This sound penetrated thousands of miles and shook the entire east coast. Even the clouds above were dissipated. Boom! Soon, a figure drew an arc from the air and slammed into the ground. The surrounding soil instantly exploded, and a woman in a black tights and a charming figure appeared here. Her eyes were filled with excitement and an indescribable anger. Odin, I didn't expect you, an old immortal, to actually come. I thought you were hiding away like a coward. Hela's mouth curled up, with a strong murderous look in her eyes. The person she hated the most was Odin. This guy dared to seal her away. Hela, shut up, how dare you not kneel before the father of the gods? The moment Thor saw Hela, the scene of being humiliated instantly came to his mind. He looked at Hela with a ferocious expression. If Odin had not been here, he would have rushed over immediately. He would never forget the humiliation that happened. Yo yo yo, isn't this our hammer god? Did you go back to find your mother in pain? Hela crossed her arms, her mouth corners raised, her chin raised, her eyes full of ridicule and disdain. Seeing her so-called brother in a state of rage, her mood suddenly became much happier. You, Thor's voice trembled, his eyes full of anger. It must be said that Hela's words made his face look extremely ugly. Because he really couldn't control lightning without the hammer. He was obviously crowned with the title of Thor, but he had to rely on Mjolnir. However, what Hela said was indeed the truth. Without Mjolnir, there was no way to activate his divine power. Although Mjolnir provided convenience, it also became an invisible shackle for him. Once he lost Mjolnir, he would have no way to awaken the power in his body. Frigga has passed away, but at this moment, Odin's eyes flashed with sadness and he told the news. Hearing this, Hela's endless anger turned into sadness and she became very silent. She didn't expect that Frigga was dead. Although Frigga was not her biological mother, she was the one who cared about her the most. No matter what grievances she suffered, Frigga would stand up for her. Even when she was about to be sealed, she knew that Frigga pleaded for her. So after hearing the news, she became extremely disappointed. You deserve to die for not protecting her. Hela focused all her hatred on Odin. In her opinion, Odin did not take responsibility at all. Hela, I didn't expect that after so many years, you are still like this. Odin looked at Hela and frowned slightly. Although he knew Hela's nature, he still felt unhappy when he saw this scene. Haha, you old man, if you just kneel down in front of me, I will definitely become gentle and polite. Hela never spoiled Odin at all. All she had in her heart was endless anger. What she wanted most was to see Odin die in front of her. Only in this way could she wash away her resentment. You actually dared to say such words to your father. Thor couldn't stand it anymore, and he pointed at Hela with a large battle axe he had brought. "Shut up, stupid trash." Hela opened her hands suddenly, and as she spread her hands, the hair on her head began to change. As it changed, it turned into a helmet like a sharp horn, and a sword of the night sky appeared in both hands. The black long blade seemed to be poisoned, and a dark green light appeared on the top of the two blades. Boom! Without saying a word, she launched the attack without hesitation. The two sharp blades broke through the air and flew towards Odin's chest. The moment the two sharp blades were shot out, the surrounding air was constantly sweeping, wrapped around the flying blades. The hurricane brought up even rolled up the grass below, like two extremely huge earth thorns. The soil quickly stabbed forward around the sword of the night sky, looking like a spear that could break through everything. "Let me do it." Thor looked at the fierce attack and suddenly jumped in front of Odin, with a flash of determination in his eyes. Lightning began to spread along his hands, and the bright electric light continued to gather. And his whole body was like a cannonball, rushing towards the two earth spikes. He flashed from the side and grabbed the tail of the first night sky sword with his right hand. At the same time, a terrifying force burst out of his body, and his left hand suddenly grabbed the other one. The veins on his arm bulged, but the moment he touched it, a dark green light suddenly burst out. This huge power directly blasted Thor away, and even flew dozens of meters away. After rolling on the ground for several times, he finally got up. But because of his intervention, although the night sky sword was not stopped, it still deviated from the direction. Flying to both sides not far away, it exploded suddenly, and countless lands splashed around. Even the trees were directly cracked by the energy driven by this. "God of hammers, you are too weak." Hela raised her right hand, and the night sky swords that fell on both sides in the distance suddenly rose from the ground. Wrapped in green energy, they kept spinning in the sky, and then suddenly returned to Hela's hand. She looked at Thor, who was glaring at her not far away, and a hint of sadness flashed in her eyes. "You should be thankful that you are not like me, and you were not forced to commit suicide when you were a child, and you don't have to live with death every day. But your comfortable life has made you lose the blood of a warrior, and made you degenerate and weak." When Hela said this, her eyes showed a look of reminiscence, and her tone was full of endless sighs. She was constantly struggling on the edge of death at that time, which was simply unacceptable to her. Although her strength was getting stronger and stronger, this experience made her unforgettable for the rest of her life. Darkness, death, despair, pain, wailing, this series of emotions was like fear that had always enveloped her. "Father." Thor stood up and looked at Odin with a puzzled look. Because he could see that what his sister said was not nonsense. It seemed to be true. If so, then his father did not seem to be the wise king he imagined. He was not the extremely kind and wise king. Odin just glanced at Thor lightly, and clenched the eternal spear stuck in the ground with his right hand. "That's enough, Hela, since you are stubborn, don't blame me." Odin slowly pulled out the spear of eternity. At the same time, the terrifying pressure continued to spread over his body. The surrounding ground suddenly felt an extremely strong pressure. The ground was like a ring, collapsing around it one by one. It was as if an invisible weight was constantly pressing on the ground. Bang, bang, bang. As the pressure increased, the surrounding ground sank more than 10 centimeters deep. Odin walked towards Hela step by step, with arrogance and anger in his actions. There was a golden light flashing on his body. If someone familiar with Odin saw it, they would know that Odin was angry. He is the king of the gods and will never allow anyone to dare to question his decision. "It's time to settle the accounts between us." Hela watched Odin approaching step by step, her eyes more alert and solemn. This is completely different from her stupid brother. This is Odin. His strength is extremely terrifying, and she must be 120% alert to face him. She clenched the sword of the night sky in her hand, and her body sank slightly. The dark green light enveloped her whole body, giving her faster speed and strength. Boom! The next second, the place where she was standing suddenly exploded. Countless soil mixed with dead grass splashed around. Her speed at this moment seemed to exceed light. Only a green light could be seen faintly. Hela's right hand suddenly pulled down, and a huge green beam of light suddenly appeared in the sky, blasting towards Odin. And she also relied on her opportunity to quickly approach Odin. The terrifying beam of light rushed down, swept across the ground, and left charred marks and deep pits on the ground. The terrifying majesty immediately enveloped the entire ground. Odin suddenly raised the Spear of Eternity and swung it towards the sky. The golden light suddenly swept towards the oncoming light column. When it hit the light column, a strange sound came. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The light column was actually split directly by the golden light. At the same time, the golden light began to spread rapidly, swallowing the light column in just a blink of an eye. In the distance, a figure was sitting on a bronze seat smoking. He crossed his legs lightly, looking into the distance with interest, with the corners of his mouth slightly raised. That leisurely look looked like an extremely majestic king. The eyes that emitted a faint red light seemed to be able to see through everything. Looking at what happened on the scene, his eyes were filled with indifference. Hod wanted to come forward to solve it directly, but he didn't expect Hela to take the initiative to ask for a fight. Want resolve this battle with your own strength. After all, for Hela, this is a revenge that spans thousands of years. Considering this point, Hood did not intervene at the first time, but watched things happen quietly here. Bang! At this time, Hela has taken this opportunity to stab in front of Odin. The Spear of Eternity and the Sword of the Night Sky collided with each other, and terrifying power burst out around the two. The weapons made a sound of steel clashing in the confrontation. The buzzing sound of the collision even made these golden-armored warriors cover their ears. The power alone is not something they can get involved in. As the power burst out, the ground rolled up and exploded in all directions. The two stood in the center, looking at each other with anger, and there was only anger in their eyes. The Eternal Spear is much better than Thor's hammer. Hodder crossed his legs and leaned on the stool in a comfortable posture. He could clearly feel the gap between the Eternal Spear and Thor's hammer. This is indeed a weapon that has been tested on the Celestials. Back then, the Celestials wanted to use the Nine Realms as a testing ground, but were eventually resisted by Odin. At that time, Odin relied on the Destroyer armor and held the Eternal Spear Gungnir to fight against the ancient Celestials. Although Odin was seriously injured after the battle, several Celestials died. It was also because of this battle that Odin's status was established, his reputation resounded throughout the universe, and his status as the King of Gods was established. It didn't take long for Hela to fall into a disadvantage. Odin had too much experience, and Hela hadn't participated in a battle for many years. With the help of the pressure brought by the weapon, Hela suddenly jumped back and jumped dozens of meters away. And her whole body released a rich and dark divine power, which continued to diffuse around. The air around him fluctuated, and even the space was distorted. At the same time, a strong smell of death came from the air. It was an indescribable stench, accompanied by countless wailing and crying. As the sound spread, the ground cracked, as if hell was returning to the world. Countless armies of the undead crawled out from the ground. This is her kingdom of death. Those undead wailed in pain and struggled to rush out. The resentful voice echoed throughout the sky, as if helping Hela release her endless anger. Odin looked solemn. Facing Hela, who used the death godhood, he had to take it seriously. He gritted his teeth, and his eyes radiated dazzling golden light. A huge divine power gathered towards the Eternal Spear in his hand. As the golden light gathered, the Eternal Spear also trembled continuously, and the energy in it made the Eternal Spear seem alive at this moment. Odin took a deep breath and threw the Eternal Spear in his hand towards Hela and her army of the undead. At this moment, the Eternal Spear, which carried endless divine power, turned into a meteor. It suddenly forked towards Hela. This terrifying power was about to reach Hela in an instant. Even the undead that crawled out of the ground could not withstand this terrifying energy. Even if it was more than 10 meters away, it was directly torn to pieces by this enveloping power. Hela's heart tightened, but she was not afraid. She tightly grasped the two swords, gritted her teeth, and raised the night sky sword to shoot down the flying Eternal Spear. Boom! However, when the Eternal Spear fell, a huge energy burst, and the golden light arc visible to the naked eye spread. The golden light directly enveloped everything. It was like a circular barrier that continued to expand and spread towards everything around. This enveloping power pushed the ground and the surrounding undead suddenly around. When the undead touched these golden lights, they all let out extremely terrifying roars. It was like a bulldozer. As the golden light spread, the area of 2 kilometers was wrapped in this terrifying light. When the golden light dissipated, all the undead armies were annihilated. A huge deep pit appeared on the plain. It looked as if it had been bombed by countless missiles. The depth of the pit alone reached more than 40 meters. Hela was seriously injured and lay in the pit. Blood oozed from her pores, and blood flowed from the corners of her mouth. The golden spear of eternity stood on the ground next to her. If she hadn't dodged a little just now, she would have been pierced by this terrifying spear of eternity. But even so, it's not much better now. She has been sealed for many years and her divine power is too weak. She no longer has the strength to fight Odin. Odin raised his hand with an indifferent expression, and the spear of eternity sensed the power. It flew towards Odin suddenly, and he directly took back the spear of eternity and strode towards Hela. Hela, in the name of the Father of the Gods, in the name of the ancestors of the gods, in the name of the 9 realms, I rebel against you. Odin walked into the pit, looked at Hela lying on the ground, strode over, and began to read out the judgment. Whoosh! As he was speaking, Odin suddenly felt the danger approaching quickly, and his eyes suddenly widened. And the next second, a figure suddenly appeared and stood beside Hela very abruptly. Thor was stunned, he didn't even see how the man appeared. And then came an indescribable sense of fear. Because the speed was so fast that he couldn't see clearly. He could be sure that this was not magic, but power. The purest power. Hela is my subordinate now. The man put his hands in his pockets, and after making sure that Hela was fine, he slowly walked to Odin. The figure in black walked to a distance of less than half a meter from Odin, and said in an unquestionable tone, "Have you asked me about this matter?" Odin frowned, and his heartbeat slowly accelerated at this time. Because there was a terrifying aura bursting out of this young man. This was a terrifying power he had never felt before. Hood. Thor had a good memory. When he saw Hood, he recalled that he had seen a photo of the 2 of them in Tony's office in the Avengers. You know, Tony rarely puts other people's photos in a place where he can see them at a glance. At that time, he casually asked the man's name, so he remembered clearly that the man was called Hood. After all, Tony's praise of Hood at that time was beyond his expectations. He had never seen Tony, a proud playboy, praise someone so sincerely. And this person was Hood, so he recognized Hood the moment he saw him. Wait a minute, he suddenly realized that something was wrong, that is, why did Hood appear here? Coupled with his attitude towards Hela just now, an extremely terrifying idea emerged in his mind. In his mind, that is to say, Hood is the mysterious man. Bang! Before Thor could think more, an extremely terrifying aura suddenly burst out from Hood's body. The dark red energy continued to surge and spread along the body like a wave. This terrifying aura is no less than that of his own father. It is also because of this terrifying aura that Thor confirmed his guess. The dark red air wave contains endless terrifying power. When this power appeared, the sky and the earth changed color. The soil under his feet was constantly disappearing and transformed into black particles. Looking around, everything around him began to dissipate slowly from the edge at an extremely slow speed. This is still the case when the aura is slightly leaked. Despite this, everything around him began to change at a very fast speed. Dark red, the waves were like ripples, rolling outward with Hod as the center. The black clouds in the sky also changed at this time, and they could even clearly see that these black clouds were turning dark red. The whole sky gradually spread, and all that came into view was a blood red. It was as if they were in another world, and the light had been replaced by this terrifying dark red. Coupled with the black particles that gradually floated upwards, the golden armored warriors couldn't help but panic. They had witnessed many horrific scenes and had seen giants destroying the world. But they had never seen such a scene where just a little bit of breath leaked out could change the color of the world. This was even more terrifying than their king, the father of the gods. The breath of death continued to spread in the air, lingering in their hearts. They subconsciously clenched their weapons, as if they had seen the most terrifying enemy in the world. The red light that illuminated the earth was like blood pouring on them. Everything became so depressing and lifeless. Odin felt this extremely dignified power, and the divine power formed a golden halo around his feet and wrapped him. His eyes became more dignified, because he could clearly feel what this power was. But he didn't expect that another Midgardian could master the terrifying power. Just from Hod's expression, it was clear that he had mastered this power very skillfully. After a long time, Odin just squeezed out a sentence from his mouth. Are you the holder of the Phoenix Force? Because the Phoenix Force is too awake, as long as it is released, it will either be annihilated or constantly revitalized. And the Phoenix Force has a unique pressure, which can even destroy the existence of the universe. Even the Gingnur in his hand couldn't help but clench, as if he could launch an attack at any time. Did this guy actually release Hela? Thor could clearly feel his father's fear. He hadn't felt this kind of emotion from his father for a long time. Because Odin, the father of the gods and the strongest being, would actually react like this. He could even see that although his father stood straight, he was clearly ready to take action at any time. What he didn't expect was that the man in front of him was so young. He actually had such fearful strength that even Hela was taken in by him. Odin, I'll give you a choice. Although Hod's eyes were like a pool of stagnant water, he spoke as if he was giving an order. You can choose to leave this place, that is, the earth. Although he didn't have a good impression of Odin, he still had some use for him. That's why he didn't plan to kill Odin with just one finger. Midgardians, this is a matter between gods. Odin gritted his teeth, veins popping out on his neck, as if he was a subject protesting in front of the king. He admitted that he was indeed very afraid of the Midgardian in front of him. Because this strength was much stronger than he had imagined. Even if he took action, he didn't know if he could win on equal terms. What's more, the other party's indifferent tone made him extremely angry. He was Odin, the father of the gods, the god who ended the existence of the Celestials and defeated the fire giants to seal them up. And this Midgardian actually spoke to him in such a tone. God, Hod sneered disdainfully, and then said, Hela's crime does not deserve death. In his eyes, the so-called gods are just titles they give themselves because of their strength. In fact, only those with enough strength can be called true gods. This is just a way to make people admire them under the banner of gods. No, you don't understand Hela. Although Odin felt the disdain on Hord's face, he still gritted his teeth and refuted. Hela is bloodthirsty and cruel, and she will do anything to achieve her goals. Bullshit. I wasn't the only one who fought on the battlefield and committed atrocities with me. However, after you climbed to the top, you ruthlessly abandoned us. You are truly cruel. Hela's eyes were red with anger. She was just the sharpest weapon under Odin's command at the beginning. It was true that she kept fighting and killing enemies. But she was just a weapon after all. It was not her who truly held the power of life and death. It was Odin. But at this time, he actually dared to say that she was cold-blooded and cruel. She might indeed be like this later, but she was forced to do so by Odin. This cruel fact left her with no way to defend herself. It was just a slander against her from a commanding height. Shut up, Thor roared in anger. He would never allow anyone to slander his father. In his opinion, this was clearly disloyalty to his father. As long as one was loyal enough, he would never be abandoned. This was clearly slander and defamation of his father. But what Thor didn't expect was that his father interrupted him with a solemn voice. I don't deny what you said, I used to be like that. But after I became the father of gods, I realized that truly strong people never live for themselves. And everything you did at that time was necessary, but this cannot cover up the fact that you are cold-blooded and cruel. Odin raised his head, his expression was cold and indescribable. Because he always felt that everything he did was right. To be more precise, as a king, this is what he should do. Nothing he did was wrong. This is the pride and confidence of the king. He. So, is this the answer you, Odin, gave in the end after slaughtering countless lives and standing in a sea of blood? Hela's expression was filled with anger, and even with a hint of an indescribable smile, as if with a mockery. She knew very well what Odin was thinking in his heart, and what he said was simply a joke. This was just the executioner putting away the butcher knife after completing his task. Even if he put on a hypocritical look, he couldn't hide his extremely dirty heart. Odin never even thought that what he had done before was wrong, and this was the most disgusting thing for her. It was also for this reason that her only thoughts about Odin were anger and displeasure. Hela, you don't understand at all. You have been blinded by killing. Odin's clenched teeth made a clacking sound. Even his eyes were filled with a strong murderous intent. Hee. Odin, you are not returning to the right path, you are just realizing that your own strength is not enough. Your strong greed will eventually stop you in the 9 realms. You can't even suppress Hela. You are afraid that her power will grow and affect your position one day. You are not enlightened, but afraid. Hod looked Odin up and down and sneered. And every word he said was like a knife that ripped Odin's skin open, revealing his most unbearable side. This was indeed Odin's idea, but he never thought that the Midgardian in front of him would know so much. It can even be said that even Hela didn't know so much. But the more this happened, the angrier Odin became, and even a stiff look appeared on his face. Because he didn't even know where to start the argument. Indeed, he has always been dissatisfied with being able to control only the 9 realms. His ambition is to cover all the places he can see. But because of his strength, he could only suppress his crazy and paranoid ideas in the end. He made himself a qualified king, and that was all he could do. Father, is all this true? Thor noticed Odin's ugly expression and asked with a trembling voice. He couldn't believe that the father he had been trying so hard to protect had such an unbearable side. This fact was like a steel needle piercing his heart, and even Thor couldn't help but start to doubt his father at this time. Because what the other party said seemed to be true, as if the person who was wrong was indeed his father. Over the years, the image of my father in my heart has completely fallen apart. My father is not a kind and wise ruler. Enough. How dare the Midgardians talk nonsense? Odin roared, and terrifying power burst out from his body in an instant. The lightning in the sky also began to flash and jump constantly at this time. His eyes turned into golden pupils at this time, and endless glimmers shone in his eyes, like an endless ocean of energy. Endless and bottomless, the energy was also jumping on the armor on his body. As the breath accumulated, even the surface of the eternal spear Gingnir began to emit dazzling golden light. The light spread in all directions, and even the area covered by the red light was directly torn apart by the light into a space of several meters. It can be clearly seen from the blue veins on his neck that he is now extremely angry. This Midgard man actually said the fact that he was most reluctant to say. The more this happened, the angrier he felt. This was clearly rubbing the face he had built on the ground. And just with these words, even his son Thor could see that something was wrong. But the more this happened, the angrier and more afraid he became. He was worried that this Midgard man would reveal more information. Haha. Looking at Odin, who was extremely angry, the corners of Hod's mouth slightly raised. Did you get angry just because you were told so? He looked at Odin's furious look and couldn't help but sneered in disdain. In his opinion, Odin has never been like a king, because in his opinion, a real king should have firm confidence. Even if he did something wrong, even if he has become the target of public criticism, he still thinks it is right. But Odin has always wanted to cover up his true self, which is not something a king should do. Moreover, even if he really covered it up, it would not be possible to cover it up for long. Perhaps. In the post-Odin reign era, everyone in the 9 realms believed that Odin was the savior. He had countless believers and was revered by countless people. Odin was also the living totem of the gods' domain. So he knew very well that the reason why Odin looked like this now was because only the winner could change what happened. The reason why Odin was so popular among the people was because he was the only one who could change what happened. This is why Odin is so famous. And all the right to speak is in the hands of the most powerful people. Even those who had lost their homes thought that Odin was a very good god. In fact, Odin had caused countless killings for the sake of the 9 realms. He was even worried about Hela and sealed her. Wang Nuo's purpose was to prevent everyone from knowing what had happened. So in his opinion, everything that happened was just to push his poor daughter out to take the blame. As long as he could get enough benefits, he could even sacrifice more things. The so-called danger, blood, and brutality are nothing more than a skin that Odin put on Hela. This skin can always help him cover up the facts that happened. And Hela's growth into what it is today was all caused by Odin. Ignorance. You have been bewitched by Hela too deeply, and have long lost sight of reality. The universe is in the present, not in the past. Odin said in a low and hoarse voice, looking at Hod with a solemn look in his eyes, as the father of the gods, on behalf of the supreme gods of the 9 realms, I declare that you have destroyed the seal of the gods and put the universe into danger again. Your existence brings shame to the world and to countless lives. In the name of the priest. Boom. As Odin said the last word, the earth shook and cracked. Odin was emitting golden light, as if he was covered by holy light. There was an invisible force in the sky that wanted to break through the red light. Not only that, Odin at this time was completely different from before. All his power had been released. The energy on his body enveloped him. He was originally covered with golden light, and he looked like a saint covered with holy light. People of Midgard, accept the judgment of death. He raised the eternal spear and used extremely terrifying power to directly stab Horde. Whoosh! A piercing sound was heard instantly. Everything in time seemed to have stopped at this moment. Then a dazzling golden light flashed, like a stream of shoot out. At an extremely fast speed, it also carries an extremely terrifying force. The force that appeared was extremely strange, and even the space was experiencing violent fluctuations. The surrounding earth was shaking and couldn't stop cracking. Chapter 91. Hodder, be careful. Seeing this powerful blow, Hela behind him issued a hasty warning. She could clearly feel that Odin was now at the peak of anger. And this must be a blow from Odin with all his strength. Although she had always wanted to kill Odin, she knew very well how strong Odin was. The energy of this blow could even kill her easily. Boom! Although this terrifying energy was piercing at a rapid speed, there was no fear on Hodder's face, but a touch of calmness. It was as if this blow was just like soft cotton. Godfather level. Hod's mouth corners rose, he stood firmly in place. His right hand suddenly grabbed the tip of the eternal spear Gingnir. Although he had already grabbed the tip of the spear, terrifying energy also burst out at this moment. What followed was an extremely terrifying energy output, which surrounded Hod in just a moment. The energy at the tip of the golden eternal spear Gingnir exploded in all directions. These bursts were like needles of fine threads, rushing towards Hod madly. Terrifying energy burst out in the eternal spear Gingnir, and sharp air waves hit. But facing the impact like a storm, Hod's face did not have the slightest expression. Only dark red energy was emanating from his body. Despite this, Hod's hair was still blown extremely messy. But this was still powerless after all. After flashing for a moment, the eternal spear Gingnir finally stopped. Is this the so-called father of the gods? It seems that he is much weaker than I thought. Hod casually threw the eternal spear Gingnir back in front of Odin, and the sharp tip of the spear directly pierced Odin's feet. This is clearly a naked provocation. His current physical strength plus the power of the phoenix can even easily catch the eternal spear Gingnir. Although the strength is good, it is far inferior to him. Although the eternal spear Gingnir is also a divine weapon, it still has a limit after all. So strong. Hela's eyes widened in shock. She had used 3 moves before but failed to hurt Hod. But this was actually nothing to Odin. But from the current scene, Hod was at least able to fight Odin on equal terms. You know, Odin was a godlike existence, but he couldn't hurt Hod at all. This person was really worthy of being her favorite. Even in the face of such danger, he could be extremely elegant and calm. He actually took his father's eternal spear. How on earth did he do that? Thor's eyes widened. He knew very well that Odin must have attacked with anger just now. Even the gods had to avoid his father's attack but the man in front of him, named Hod, could take it easily. This kind of thing was like a dream. He couldn't figure out how he did it no matter how hard he thought. It can be said that since he was born, no one has ever seen anyone who can take Odin's eternal spear. Even after Hod took it, his expression was extremely calm, and he even had a slight smile on his lips to provoke Odin. Because throwing the weapon back was clearly an act of contempt. Even the army of golden armored warriors behind him widened their eyes. Many of them had followed Odin to fight. So they knew very well how terrifying Odin's strength was. This move could even easily penetrate the chest of the fire giant. But for this Midgardian, it didn't have any effect. This Midgardian is so powerful. King Odin must have not used his full strength. Otherwise, how could that guy have been able to block it? I didn't expect that there would be such a terrifying and powerful person in such a remote place. Quote. There were low whispers coming from Odin's army. This sound reached Odin's ears, and Odin's face turned red. Looking at the eternal spear Gungnir slanting in front of him, he felt even more humiliated. This was clearly telling him that even if he was given a weapon, he would never be able to defeat him. He had faced so many enemies, but he had never encountered an enemy who was so contemptuous of him. This made his cheeks red, and an indescribable anger surged in his heart. "You fellow!" Odin's voice echoed in the vast land like the roar of thunder. He clenched the eternal spear in front of him with both hands, and the golden light kept jumping like lightning wrapped around him. The remaining one eye even emitted golden light, and the ground where he stood began to crack continuously. The golden light shone out from the cracked land, and the terrifying power was like a wandering earth dragon, arching the ground open. What was even more terrifying was that the golden light rushed straight into the sky, and directly penetrated the dark red sky with a golden pillar shining on him. This power seemed to be able to destroy the flow of time and everything around was shrouded in golden light. Carrying extremely terrifying power, even the air was shattered. Just like pieces of glass, these shattered spaces were emitting golden light. "Midgardians, you have successfully provoked my anger." Odin gnashed his teeth and looked at the nearby Gain. He must let Horde know what the dignity of the Father of the Gods is and what is inviolable. He suddenly pulled out the eternal spear Gungnir in his hand. The eternal spear was in contact with these rays of light. At that moment, it was like a vortex that continuously absorbed the energy inside, while making a vibrating humming sound. It was as if it also felt Odin's anger, and even the tip of the spear was trembling slightly. The next moment, Odin moved. The moment he moved, the space shattered. It was as if this space simply could not bear his power. He suddenly swung the spear of eternity in his hand towards Hod. At the same time, his right foot stomped on the ground. This instantly splashed up dust more than 10 meters high. The sound of the explosion was like a wave that continued to ripple around. With just one movement, the world changed rapidly. The flying spear of eternity Gungnir seemed to be able to travel through time and space. In just a blink of an eye, it appeared in front of Hod's eyes, and he could even see the golden light trying to pierce his eyes. "It looks interesting. Is this Odin's ability?" Hodder saw that Gungnir, the spear of eternity, was less than a centimeter away from him, but he was not panicked at all. The whole person seemed to have turned on slow motion. The whole world was stagnant at this moment, and only Hodder could dodge easily. His hand touched the tip of Gungnir, the spear of eternity, in just an instant. When the dark red light touched the tip of the spear of eternity, ripples began to ripple continuously. It was like throwing a small piece of stone into the lake. Although there were only a few ripples, it was easily caught. At the same time, Hodder suddenly grabbed the spear of eternity that was about to fall. It has to be said that this attack is much more interesting than the previous one. It even requires the use of the power of the Phoenix to block this attack. Boom! Odin let out a sharp explosion at this time. Even the air could not stop such a fast speed. It could be vaguely seen that the air formed a streamline on the surface of Odin's body. The whole person was like an unstoppable meteor, rushing towards Hod with a huge momentum. This was clearly intended to use the eternal spear Gungnir to attract Hod's attention, and then take the opportunity to get close. Although Odin was extremely cruel, Hod had to admit that Odin's combat awareness was indeed very strong. Not only that, if it was facing other enemies, they might not have noticed the eternal spear in their hand. Seeing this, Hod raised the corners of his mouth and threw the eternal spear in his hand aside. His eyes flashed with golden light, and then gathered endless power. The golden light in his eyes was like a pillar, and the terrifying rays carried a terrifying force and shot directly at Odin. When his eyes swept over the ground, it was like cheese pierced by a hot butter knife. They melted into red liquid, and as the surging energy was agitated, it gushed out like an erupting torrent. Even the surrounding air was constantly rippling at this time, like boiling water. The temperature of the air began to rise sharply, reaching thousands of degrees in just a moment, and even the surrounding gravel ACBB began to melt continuously. As the temperature of the surrounding air continued to rise, even the golden armored warriors not far away felt that the armor on their bodies had faintly softened. When the golden light shone on Odin, the terrifying energy of the two machines collided with each other. In an instant time, the whole world seemed to have stopped at this moment. All colors seemed to have returned to their original state and turned into black and white. Even time seemed to have solidified at this moment, and everyone's senses seemed to have stagnated at this moment. The power of these two energies seemed to be able to destroy even time. In an instant, a roar resounded throughout the land, and the overwhelming golden light broke through the oppressive red light. The two golden lights burst out at this moment, and everyone couldn't help but close their eyes. Crack, boom, the aftermath of the collision of forces began to spread from the center of the collision to the surroundings. The ground cracked instantly, and then floated slightly. The ground shook violently, and then quickly exploded in all directions. Countless soils rolled around like waves. Get out of the way. Thor gritted his teeth and roared at the golden-armored warriors. This level of battle, even the aftermath, was not something they could withstand. They all ran quickly into the distance. The exploded land seemed to be able to cover the sky and the sun. It could even raise huge waves hundreds of meters high. The original plane began to collapse rapidly, and just one impact formed a huge circular pit. Even the ground was pressed down by this terrifying force and sank dozens of meters. Hela thought she would be swept away by the aftermath, but just now she suddenly felt that Hood could even distract her and move her to a distant place. This was an extremely terrifying picture, and a huge mushroom-like golden energy slowly rose into the sky. At this moment, Hela finally understood how terrifying Hood's strength was. It can even be said that Hood has never used his true strength against her. She looked at the dazzling golden light, and she couldn't even open her eyes. Even the sun seemed unable to cover the terrifying light. Is this the power of my father? Thor stopped and looked back, his heartbeat accelerating. He thought Hela's power was already very strong, but it was not at the same level as his father's. Since he grew up, he had never seen Odin use his full strength. But this time, he realized how terrible his father was. And what he didn't expect was that the man named Horde actually had such terrifying power. At the same time, in the sky, the Quinjet flew over. However, the sudden strong wind caused the fighter to shake violently in the sky. What happened? What happened over there? Tony felt the violent fluctuations, and his expression became extremely solemn. This was the Quinjet fighter he was most proud of, and even a typhoon could ensure the stability of the fuselage. But he didn't expect to encounter such violent turbulence. And in the next second, a huge golden pillar of light shot straight into the sky. The dazzling light instantly shot in from the glass of the cockpit, and everyone couldn't help but squint their eyes. Boss, there's an energy explosion ahead. Friday began to report the data ahead. What is the energy level? Looking at the dazzling golden light, Tony suddenly came back to his senses and asked in a hurried tone. After testing, it was found that two energy bodies collided, and the explosion caused was no less than hundreds of missiles exploding at the same time. When Friday reported the detection results, everyone's expression turned extremely pale. This was hundreds of missiles exploding at the same time. What on earth could be able to burst out such a terrifying power? What a disaster-ridden New York. Does God want to destroy this sinful city? Rode frowned and complained, because the energy fluctuation was too big. I don't understand what this energy is all about. Natasha took a deep breath, her eyes filled with fear. She didn't even know if she would be able to survive if she joined this kind of battle. What on earth is going on? Could it be that mysterious man? This figure suddenly appeared in Tony's mind. Among all the people present, only Wanda's face became particularly strange. Because her intuition told her that it might really be Hood. Bang! At this time, accompanied by a huge cyclone in the sky. The golden light dissipated. The next second, a sound like a missile explosion resounded through the sky again. I saw a figure falling, smashing to the ground. The earth shook. The falling figure, driven by the huge force, caused a shocking sonic boom. You can even see the white air waves echoing, and the fragments of land that rose up. In the huge deep pit, a disheveled figure lay in the center. Odin below looked at Hood and raised his head with difficulty. His usually carefully groomed beard was already covered with dust. The neatly combed hair was now messy, and the whole person was in a mess. He knew that Hood was very strong, but he didn't expect him to be so strong. Eternal Spear. Odin roared and summoned the Eternal Spear, which instantly returned to Odin's hand. He held the Eternal Spear tightly and continued to infuse the power of Odin into the spear. The eternal spear in his hand began to extend continuously at this moment, and in the blink of an eye it turned into a 1.5-meter-long light spear. Holding the magic spear, Odin turned into a rainbow and rushed straight into the sky. Horde met him head-on, and the two collided again. The cyclone burst out. Come on. Hod raised his mouth and resisted the power of Odin that continued to burst out from the eternal spear. He gritted his teeth and a dark red air flow emanated from his body. His right hand suddenly swung and collided with the spear of eternity. The next second, Odin was directly shaken away. Looking at this scene, Odin's expression was full of disbelief. Before he could react, Horde kicked him far away. At this time, in the Quinjet, Tony looked into the distance. In the sky, the immovable figure between heaven and earth. That figure. Tony's expression was touched. That figure was so familiar. It's him again. Although the distance was still far, Tony recognized the familiar figure at a glance through the camera feed. He didn't expect that it was this mysterious guy who did it again, which gave him a headache for a while. It can be said that almost everything that happened recently has the shadow of this mysterious man. Can't you just calm down for a while? Tony's expression has become extremely helpless. After all, this is not a battle they can intervene in. But they can't just ignore it, which gives him a headache. Who is his opponent? Wanda leaned over and squinted her eyes to see the other person in the picture clearly. How could someone be as strong as Hood? And the commotion just now made her a little worried. I don't know him, but he looks familiar. Steve frowned and looked at the screen, a look of reminiscence flashing in his eyes. He always felt that he seemed to have seen this person somewhere, but he couldn't remember it for a while. The only thing that was certain was that this person was very powerful. Friday scans the other party's identity. Tony asked Friday to start checking the other party's identity without saying anything. Being able to fight against the mysterious man, it is certain that this person must be very powerful. No matter what the potential factors are, he must find out the other party's identity. Boss, we have scanned the opponent. According to the data and other records, the opponent of the mysterious man is very likely to be Odin, the king of Asgard. Friday quickly gave an answer. But when Friday said this, everyone present was shocked. No one thought that the opponent of this mysterious man was actually the king of gods. Everyone present was very familiar with the Norse mythology, and the more so, the more they knew about the power of the king of gods Odin. Odin is the most powerful of all gods. Even Thor has told them more than once that Odin is his father. Even Thor admitted that he could never defeat his father. From this, we can see how powerful the opponent is. But now Odin has become the enemy of the mysterious man. So, why did they clash? Steve asked the most important question. After all, although the mysterious man is powerful, he has never taken the initiative to hurt humans. Or think of using his own power to deal with others. Every time he appears, there is basically a reason. Judging from his every move, he should be on the side of humans. But this mysterious man is now in conflict with Odin. No matter how you look at it, it's not right. And even if they want to intervene, they don't even know which side they should stand on. I think this is most likely related to Hela. Tony noticed a figure on the screen, pointed at that figure and gave his analysis. It is very likely that Thor brought Odin here to deal with Hela. As soon as these words came out, everyone present suddenly realized. They also knew that Hela was a subordinate of the mysterious man, and if they wanted to take Hela away, they had to get the mysterious man's consent. But the mysterious man's character must be arrogant, that is to say, the two sides probably fought because of this reason. This mysterious man is too scary. He actually fought with Odin without saying anything. Rod sighed, his voice full of mixed feelings. In fact, logically speaking, they should stand on the side of the mysterious man. After all, if it weren't for the mysterious man, they would definitely fall apart at that time. However, Thor is their companion, not to mention that they don't know how to get involved in this kind of battle. It can even be said that even getting close is a problem. Hod should be okay, right? Wanda looked at the fierce battle in the distance with a worried look on her face and prayed silently in her heart. Although she knew that Hod was very powerful, he was still Odin, the father of the gods. He must be extremely powerful and experienced in many battles. He was a god after all. Even if she didn't get close, Wanda could clearly feel the terrifying energy coming from him. What do you think about the battle between the mysterious man and the god King Odin? Natasha noticed the worried look on Wanda's face and took the initiative to ask. They all wanted to know the current situation. Although the mysterious man is very strong, he still chose the wrong opponent. After all, the opponent is the god King Odin. Steve is not optimistic about the mysterious man, although his strength is much stronger than theirs. But Thor has already found the most powerful person in their god realm. It is impossible to deal with the god King Odin, who can unify the 9 realms. I think so too. After all, how can we humans compare to gods? Rhodes nodded thoughtfully. Although the mysterious man's power is very strong, it still belongs to the category of humans. Wanda heard the conversation between her teammates and obviously became more worried. But even so, she could only worry, because although she had chaos magic. But in a battle of this level, it is difficult for her to get started. It can even be said that just resisting the aftermath of the battle is already very difficult. Bang! At this time, the dust and fog covering the deep space on the horizon shone with golden light, and endless light dispersed the dust and fog. Endless heat waves surged, and the earth continued to tremble slightly. No, Odin is actually at a disadvantage in this battle. When Rhodes saw Odin being smashed into the ground, his eyes almost popped out. He was dumbfounded when he saw this scene. Is this still a human? You know, that's the god King Odin. He actually directly Odin crashed into the ground, which was beyond his expectation. In the vast dust and fog, the fallen god Odin walked out with a panicked look on his face, and his eyes were filled with unspeakable anger. He had never thought that such a Midgardian could obtain such a terrifying power. Even the use of the Phoenix Force was far beyond his imagination. Even among all the people who possessed the Phoenix Force in the universe, he was basically one of the few. Young man, I admit that you are very powerful. The one eye of the god King Odin glowed with golden light, and it became more and more dazzling. Although he had just been beaten into the mud, there was no sign of discouragement in his expression. Although he had just used all his strength, in fact, he could not have no trump card at all. It's just that he didn't want to use that method, which would inevitably bring some side effects to the body every time. But if it was used to deal with this young man, he would do it no matter how reluctant he was. Old man, you're still okay. Hod raised the corner of his mouth and landed on the ground in a panic. He put his hands back into his pockets and stared at Odin. But his words were still full of teasing. It was as if he had just stretched his body casually. He even yawned, and every move seemed to be a provocation to Odin. But he had to admit that Odin was indeed much easier to beat. Even if he released more power, he didn't have to worry about beating Odin to death. This was a rare top-notch sandbag. You know, if it was someone else, he would have been beaten into powder just by taking it. Oh, I hope you can still stand and talk to me later. Odin's eyes flickered with fire. It must be said that every word of Horde successfully aroused his nerves. He took a deep breath and tightly grasped the spear of eternity. His expression suddenly condensed, and he silently said to the spear. For the 9 realms, for Asgard, may the gods and ancestors grant me supreme power, so that the old man, who is staggering in the dim light of the embers, can once again dedicate himself. With silent recitation, strands of golden light entangled Odin's body, containing endless power. What are you talking about with a gun? Hod had a teasing look in his eyes. Instead of interrupting Odin's spell, he quietly watched what Odin would do. He thought the most interesting thing was that he had to talk so much for a skill. But he didn't care. He wanted to see what would happen next. As long as he didn't let him down, it would be enough. Boom! A terrifying aura like a prehistoric beast suddenly erupted. A huge wave of air raged. In this violent wind, there was an irresistible imperial power. It can be clearly seen that Odin's body has changed a little at this moment. The originally shorter body has become a little taller, and the pale hair at this time is like a rejuvenated. It gradually turned into a golden color, and even his eyes became so sharp. If Odin just now still had a bit of twilight, now Odin was like a sword that had just been forged. The sharp aura was like a blade attacking in all directions. This breath. In the distance, Hela's face turned pale. She felt the terrifying aura. Even her legs were shaking uncontrollably. Father's divine power. She could clearly feel how terrifying and powerful this power was. To read the novels of Bao Shuang, Go to Philu Novel Network. It can even be said that she had never felt this power before. If she had to say it, it was many years ago when Odin burst out with such power in the battle against the Celestials. Thor's eyes lit up, and he suddenly raised his right hand and roared, "Long live Asgard! Asgard must win." He thought that his father was not a match for Hod, but he didn't expect that his father would actually take real action at this time. That terrifying power was something he had never seen before. From a distance, Odin at this time was like a bottomless abyss. It was even impossible to feel how powerful this power was, like an endless ocean. The terrifying power had been spreading all around, and it could be seen from this that he would win this time. After all, this was his father's real move, and even the Celestials were not his father's opponents. Not to mention a Midgardian. Long live Asgard! Asgard will win! Quote. The golden armored warriors behind him also raised their weapons and shouted after Thor. Is this the God King? Inside the Quinjet, Tony felt suffocated. This was an extremely terrifying force, a force that made him unable to even muster the strength to resist. At this moment, the God King Odin looked like a god towering between heaven and earth. I didn't expect that this was Odin's true strength. Steve looked at this almost invincible existence, and in his heart he even felt like an ant. He had never thought that he was weaker than others, but at this moment, this feeling came to his mind very clearly. This was no longer a force that humans could resist. Hood should be fine. Wanda's crimson glow radiated unconsciously. She wanted to help Hood. But she knew very well that if she got involved, she would not only fail to help Hood, but would even drag Hood down. Not bad, it finally looks a bit decent. Hod's originally lazy eyes were filled with a little more fighting spirit. He had thought about using all his strength. Although he had met Dormammu before, it was really meaningless to deal with something that could be resurrected infinitely. But this Odin looked much more interesting, and he also wanted to feel Odin's true strength. After all, Odin was obviously going to fire at full power, and he couldn't just act carelessly. The next second, the red light surrounded his body. Under the body covered by the clothes, the 12 zodiac charms flashed. If he was not afraid of being too shocking, he would have wanted to experiment with the ancient Doomsday. Another point is that there is no need to take the initiative to give up his life to Odin. He himself is not idle, why should he let others kill him a few times? Boom! For the glory of Asgard! Odin's roar echoed in the sky. He rushed directly to Hod, swinging the magic gun in his hand. At the moment of swinging, a powerful force was driven by energy, and countless golden lights rushed towards Hod. Released a terrifying wave, instantly destroying everything around. Countless rocks shattered. The dark clouds in the sky dissipated and turned into rain. Under the dark red light, it was like a bloody rain. Boom! Hod was wrapped in the dark red power of the Phoenix, and his body moved suddenly. An explosion burst out instantly on the spot. Hod's speed of movement even formed an empty rainless place in the rain. The next second, with a loud bang, Hod collided with Odin. Two dark red and golden lights shot into the sky. Each occupied half of the sky. It's over, Odin is going to win. Hela clenched her teeth. She actually knew about Odin's ability before. That is to recover to the strongest state within a period of time. It just takes a while to release the spell. But Hod had no intention of interrupting Odin. Odin who released this skill would become extremely terrifying, and he would no longer look like the old man in his twilight years. Father will definitely be able to kill that Hod. Thor clenched his fists excitedly, and golden and dark red lights flashed in the air. It was as if countless rays of light were constantly colliding and then separating. In the Quinjet, the Avengers had complicated expressions. Because they didn't want the two sides to fight at all, no matter which side won, it would not be a good thing. The next second, the two figures disappeared almost at the same time. The speed of the light collision was getting faster and faster, and the dark red energy and the golden energy were constantly colliding. There were continuous shocks in the air, and even the fluctuations caused by the high temperature of the air during the collision could be seen. Odin continued to inject Odin's power into the eternal spear. With a turn of his hands, the spear instantly burst out with endless power, blowing a fierce gale in the air, and the air waves visible to the naked eye lifted the sky. The divine spear stabbed at Hod in just a blink of an eye. Facing this powerful and heavy blow, Hod just waved his fist to resist with a fighting spirit in his eyes. Bang! The moment the flesh body blocked, accompanied by a buzzing sound, it actually made Odin's arms numb. How is this possible? This is a divine weapon. Odin's expression changed drastically, but then he became extremely furious and swung his gun continuously. Once, twice, 3 times. Every time he swung his gun, he added more power and swung it with more and more fierce force. But Hord resisted it all with his body. The gods can't seem to help you. Hodder raised his mouth. He looked at the eternal spear in Odin's hand with a teasing look. Eternal spear. It's nothing more than that. Odin looked at Hord's nonchalant look, his body trembling with anger, and he poured all his strength into the eternal spear. Endless aura of destruction emanated. The terrifying aura alone made the dark clouds covering the sky completely disintegrate. Odin poured his strength into the eternal spear and swung it down fiercely. Looking around, a golden torrent was released from the divine spear, and the vast golden light enveloped it. The vast golden light illuminated the earth, and it even permeated an extremely terrifying power. Half of the sky was covered by the golden light at this moment. From a distance, it seemed as if the fire clouds and the golden clouds were competing against each other. Like a pouring golden waterfall, it rushed towards Hord with extremely terrifying power. It contained a breath of destruction. This shot was slashed down. Everyone was dumbfounded. Because it was just a shot, the whole earth was shaking continuously. Boss, the attack is detected to be as strong as a magnitude 10 earthquake. Friday quickly reported the current situation. With such a powerful force, they simply couldn't let the Quinjet get close. Not to mention getting close, even staying in this position would be at risk of being affected. This spear, isn't it the meteor lance? Thor was even more shocked. His father was serious. How many people in the world have actually seen the meteor lance and the lost spear of heaven? He didn't expect that his father would use such a powerful move at this time. He had only heard his mother mention that Odin's strongest attack was the meteor lance. But he basically never used it because it was equivalent to the last blow. Because in order to use this move, at least most of the energy in the body must be gathered. And it is said that Odin will only use this extremely terrifying move when he cannot win. It can even be said that this move is not a problem even if it wants to penetrate the earth. Hod, the death goddess Hela's face suddenly changed when she saw this scene. She suddenly jumped up, and the green light in her hand continued to gather. Because this move was too powerful, she had to go forward to help Hod. But just after flying into the air, the powerful aftermath of the force had arrived. The energy she gathered couldn't even stop the 643 attack of these aftermaths. After all, this was Odin's all-out attack, and she couldn't block it at all. What's more, she is now seriously injured and it is difficult for her to move in front of her. So it is simply a fool's dream to want to resist the meteor gun released by Odin's full-strength attack. It can even be said that even in its heyday, it can only barely resist the aftermath. On the Quinjet, what should we do now? Steve asked in a serious tone. Strictly speaking, they should stand on the side of the mysterious man. After all, the mysterious man will at least help them protect the earth, but Odin will not care about the life and death of the earth. What's more, the mysterious man is Wanda's boyfriend. If it weren't for the mysterious man's appearance last time, they would have fallen apart internally. It is also for this reason that Steve has decided to stand on the side of the mysterious man. What can we do? Do you think we can intervene in such a battle? Tony had a complicated expression, gritting his teeth and shaking his head helplessly. Even if all his mechas were deployed together, they could not intervene in such a battle. It can be said that such a battle is simply not something that the Avengers can handle. What's more, he also knew that all they could do now was to wait. Although he also felt powerless, he had no way out. After all, this is the reality. Without sufficient strength, they are no different from ants. Let me down. Wanda gritted her teeth and quickly came to the front of the Quinjet, ready to open the rear exit and leave. She felt the incomparably terrifying power, and she was very worried that Hood would. Although Hood always gave her an omnipotent look, this time it was completely different. This was Odin, the king of the gods. In this situation, she absolutely could not do nothing. Wanda, calm down. Tony stood up and blocked Wanda, who was about to open the door. Get out of my way, I want to help my boyfriend. Although she didn't know what would happen to her after she went down, she was definitely unwilling to see Hood in danger, even if they died together. And she had chaos magic. Even if she could only contribute a little bit of power, it might be able to help Hood relieve the pressure. If you really want to help him, then don't interfere. Tony gritted his teeth and said in a serious voice, he has no way to be distracted now. If you show up, he will definitely be distracted. It must be said that Tony saw the current situation at a glance, although he didn't know whether the mysterious man could win. But all they could do was watch. It's not that they didn't want to help. But if they intervened rashly now, it would likely make things more complicated. What's more, the combined strength of all of them is not a match for Odin. In this case, even if Wanda went out, it wouldn't have much effect. But, Wanda clenched her teeth, her eyes slightly red. Wanda, I know you are worried, but you have to consider the current situation after all. Rhodes also persuaded at this time. Boom. At the same time, Odin's blow with all his strength slammed towards Hod. When the shot was thrown, it seemed that only this golden light could be seen in the world. The golden light was like a beam of light, and it instantly blasted towards Hod's direction. With the pressure of the golden light, everything around changed at this moment. The black particles that were originally like black threads were blown away by this terrifying blow. From a distance, it seemed as if a large piece of black mist was flying out under the sweep of the golden light. This blow was enough to destroy the world. The entire earth collapsed, and the terrifying energy impact caused all the surrounding vegetation to wither and annihilate. Even the entire northern hemisphere was shaken. The ocean began to surge violently, and the terrifying waves even caused the ocean to sweep up. Dozens of the tsunami was as high as 1 meter. The fish on the seabed began to swim towards the seabed continuously, but even if they tried their best, they were still swept into the waves by this terrifying force. A tsunami was triggered in the waters off the east coast. At this time, everyone in the northern hemisphere felt this strong vibration. Although the vibration was only for a moment, everyone on the street couldn't stand steadily. Even this sudden vibration caused the vehicles on the street to lose control. There were continuous rear-end collisions. But they didn't have time to pay attention to anything else. Instead, they subconsciously looked up at the sky, only to see a golden light flashing in the distant sky, and this light even seemed to be able to penetrate the sky and the earth. They could see it very clearly, which made them extremely panicked in their hearts. Because it seemed like the end of the world. What the hell does this happen? This can't be the end of the world. What on earth is that golden light? Quote. The people in New York saw it clearly. This beam of light seemed to be able to penetrate the sky and the earth, and they couldn't even see the end of it. The only thing they could see was that this golden light had penetrated the entire sky. And around the golden light, the clouds were like a whirlpool, spinning rapidly. When the golden light dissipated, on the barren surface, the magic gun tore a large canyon that led directly to the end of the world. The raging heat wave was everywhere. Although it was just the aftermath of the battle, melting stones and charred land could be seen in this huge pit. It was as if it had been bombed by countless explosives. The canyon had no end in sight. However, above the canyon, in the rolling heat wave, a figure stood in place. And there was a smile on his face that was difficult to express. I didn't expect that your move was quite interesting, and it almost hurt me. Hodder walked out slowly, with a faint smile, and slowly patted the dust off his body. It's a pity that it's still not strong enough. To be honest, he could have avoided the attack just now, but after thinking about it, it was impossible for the Earth to be really destroyed by more than half. So he simply stood in front of this energy, not to mention, he also wanted to try how strong it was. It has to be said that Odin's strength is still good. If he hadn't obtained an extra fragment of the Phoenix Force, he might not be able to stop it. It's just a pity that there are not so many ifs in this world. Exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. The mysterious man actually blocked it. Steve stood up suddenly, his eyes almost popping out. If he had seen it right, the mysterious man had taken the blow head on. Not only that, he didn't even move, not to mention his hands, even his clothes were still clean and tidy. I didn't expect that this mysterious man is even more powerful than Odin. Tony's voice was trembling. After all, this power was too terrifying. It even exceeded his tone. This kind of power was no longer something that humans could release. Although he thought that the mysterious man was very powerful, he never thought that the mysterious man could take it on and still be intact. This means that the mysterious man is much more powerful than Odin. He really blocked it. He actually did it. Wanda covered her mouth and her eyes turned slightly red. Just now she even thought that Hood was about to die, but she never expected that Hood was unscathed. This means that Hood's strength far exceeded her expectations. You know, this is Odin, the king of gods. This is already the most powerful existence in the world. How on earth was this done? This shouldn't be possible. This is the meteor spear. Even the gods cannot resist it. The meteor spear can penetrate everything, but it has no effect on Hod. Hela was completely confused. She had seen the battle between Odin and the gods. At that time, the meteor spear was used in the end, and the outcome was determined by the meteor spear. But this attack that Odin was most proud of had no effect on Hod. She looked at Hod tremblingly, her eyes filled with mixed emotions. In other words, even so, no one could do anything to Hod. She had never thought that she would follow such a powerful person. Even Odin, whom she had always hated, was no match for Hod. Impossible. Am I seeing this wrong? This is absolutely impossible. My father is the strongest, why can this guy stop me? Could it be that he borrowed the power of the devil? Even the devil couldn't stop it so easily. Thor couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe that his invincible father had lost. So strong. After Odin used this move, the energy in his body quickly dissipated, and his face, which had become young, instantly aged several years. He thrust the spear of eternity into the ground, his legs weakened, and he almost fell. As he entered his twilight years, he could no longer use his divine power. The power of Odin in his body had been exhausted. He raised his head and looked at the man in the sky. He couldn't understand why he could block it. You know, this was the attack he was most proud of in his life. But he couldn't even solve a Midgard man. He didn't cause the man any harm. He had faced countless enemies before, but he had never felt so weak. In fact, he had noticed it since the beginning of the fight. This man didn't take the initiative to attack at all, just like a powerful opponent feeding him moves. Most of them looked at him with a joking look. Even if his indestructible fist hit this man, what he got back was an extremely hard body. You know, he can easily destroy vibranium, but he has no way to deal with this man. However, Hood was like nothing happened. You lose. Hod landed on the ground with his hands in his pockets, looking relaxed. He walked slowly in front of Odin, as if he was strolling in his own backyard. There was a smile on the corner of his mouth, as if he was greeting him in a very gentle way. Bang. I did lose. Odin's face showed a frustrated look. His exhausted body fell to his knees in front of Hord with a thud. Although he didn't want to admit it, the facts were there. When Odin knelt on one knee, the atmosphere in the room froze. Thor was also exhausted. He was unwilling to accept it, but he had to accept it. He gritted his teeth, took a step back, and slowly knelt on one knee in front of Hord. The army brought by Odin also knelt down. Since you have all failed, Hela will be the new king of Asgard. Hod said slowly in a calm tone. The reason why he announced this order was not to harm the people of the god realm. Instead, he wanted to help them survive the next crisis. Hela should be a good ruler now. More importantly, this may prevent the coming of Ragnarok. He doesn't want to need him to run over to save these so-called gods at that time. 1.0. And, although Hela has always hated Odin, it doesn't mean that Hela doesn't know what she really needs to do. Okay. Odin looked at Hela, who was not far behind Hord, with a complicated expression. His eyes showed sadness, fatigue, and indescribable emotions. He supported himself and slowly stood up, handing the spear of eternity to Hela. I was really wrong, maybe you were right. Odin lowered his head. Hela took the eternal spear from Odin. Looking at the eternal spear in her hand, she looked at Hord with complicated eyes. Hodder, I'll leave first. After saying this, Hela's eyes flashed with a special feeling. Don't worry, I'll come back after I deal with it. After seeing Hodder nod slowly, she gathered everyone together, opened the rainbow bridge and teleported away. Hodder watched them leave. Hodder. Suddenly, a familiar voice called out from behind. Hodder turned his head and saw Wanda flying over and pounced directly on Hodder. She hugged him tightly like an octopus. Wanda. Hodder felt the warmth and softness in his arms, with a look of surprise on his face. How long have you been here? Almost from the beginning. Wanda pursed her lips and said unhappily, with such a big commotion, it's hard not to pay attention. Now the authorities have already started to deploy. Deployment. Hodder was stunned when he heard this. Yes, Tony has already notified the authorities and banned any outsiders from entering the area. Wanda nodded seriously. After all, the noise was too loud. Wait, are the others here too? Hood suddenly realized. Wanda is here, so aren't the other Avengers here too? Do you want me to bring them here? Wanda's eyes widened when she heard this, with a look of joy in her eyes. In fact, she has been struggling with this problem. After all, Hood now has a Gwen, and it would be a bit embarrassing to say it out at that time. But if Hood takes the initiative to introduce his identity, it will be completely different. That means Hood wants to meet her friends, and she no longer has to hide it. Who doesn't want her boyfriend to be open and introduce himself to others? So after answering this question, Wanda looked straight at Hood in front of her. She was a little worried that Hood would refuse, but she really hoped to get the blessings of her friends. Now no one knows Hood's identity. It would be great if Hood took the initiative to introduce himself. Tony, Steve, Natasha and others are all her best friends. It would be great if everyone could know Hood. All up to you. Hood didn't think too much about it. After all, the reason why he had been hiding his identity was because of Wanda. And another thing, he didn't want to attract more attention because of his identity. Otherwise, it would be troublesome to deal with them at that time. He came to this world to enjoy life, not to come here and do everything with all his heart. Take Tony for example. If Tony hadn't become Iron Man, he would probably still be spending his days in wine and women. It's just that everyone's life is completely different, but Hood knows very well that he doesn't like that kind of life. The reason why Dormammu was solved was because he promised Ancient One that he could take good care of Steven. Otherwise, he would not have taken the initiative to go to the Dark Dimension. He has always been a person who is afraid of trouble. Of course, if he completed a certain key event, he wouldn't mind it very much. After all, this can get a better reward from the system. Oh, Wanda's excited expression suddenly became extremely disappointed. She thought it was Hood who wanted to bring it up. But she didn't expect Hood to just ask casually, and there was no emotion on his face. She always believed that if she wanted to get along well with her partner, the communication between them must be closer. Both parties should know each other's friends and introduce themselves. But Hood didn't have such an idea at all, and he didn't seem to care about it at all. What's wrong? You don't seem happy. Hood noticed the disappointment on Wanda's face and asked with a puzzled tone. After all, the details on Wanda's face were too easy to find. It's okay. Wanda shook her head and continued. As for the others, they are now in charge of logistics support. I am not in charge of this section, so I came here first. Since Hood did not take the initiative to bring up this matter, maybe the relationship between the two sides is not close enough. And although she wanted Hood to integrate into her circle, if Hood didn't want to, then she would definitely not take the initiative to mention it. The reason why the other Avengers members did not come over was because they were shocked by Hood's powerful strength. They wanted to know Hood's identity, but the other party's strength was so strong, and the other party deliberately covered his face last time. No matter how curious they are, they will never come here on their own initiative. After all, if the mysterious man suddenly gets angry, they will just GG. So the so-called logistical support work is just an excuse. After all, they don't want to create an enemy that they can't defeat out of thin air. For them, the mysterious man is now a temporarily stable uncontrollable factor. Under this kind of power, if he gets angry because they know his identity, the entire Avengers alliance together are no match for the mysterious man. What's more, they watched Odin being beaten so badly that he couldn't raise his head. Even those people in the God realm knelt on one knee in front of the mysterious man. You don't need to see what happened to him. So the reason why they didn't come is also because of this. I see, that's great. We haven't seen each other for a long time. Hood grinned, his eyes sparkling. He stepped forward and hugged Wanda. It must be said that he was basically dealing with chores during this period. Even Gwen didn't have time to sit down and communicate properly. Now that he finally saw Wanda, he naturally couldn't help missing her. Miss me. Wanda's lost mood was suppressed by this hug. In fact, she missed Hood a lot during this period, but there were too many trivial things in the Avengers. Although basically there was no need to go out to fight, there were still many trivial things. I must miss you. Hood gave Wanda a look, and Wanda instantly understood what Hood meant. Sure enough, you, a pervert, are not thinking about me at all. Although Wanda cursed inwardly, she was still happy in her heart. No matter what, Hood was thinking about her. By the way, have you eaten? Hood put his arm around Wanda's waist and said meaningfully, I can make you a Western meal today, such as a hot dog sandwich and milk. Wanda's face flushed instantly, but looking at Hood who was so close, she couldn't help but nodded slightly. She also learned something from chatting with Natasha, that if people are not full, they will want to go out and buy something else to eat. So they must eat at home to ensure that they will not go out to eat. Then shall we go back now? Hodder looked at Wanda's shy look and suddenly his face lit up. It must be said that as they became more familiar with each other, Wanda's response became more and more passionate. He couldn't help but get excited. Wanda looked at the policeman not far away with obvious hesitation. Although she came here to negotiate first, there should be a lot of things that need to be dealt with at the scene. The scope of this battle is too large. Not to mention other things, even in New York, many people have been injured due to the sudden vibration. There are even many vehicles that have been rear-ended because of the huge movement. Even at sea, there are many things that need to be arranged and handled. This battle has affected too many people. It's okay, with Tony and the others here, there will be no problem. Although Wanda did not tell Hood the exact reason, he could still guess Wanda's thoughts at a glance. Without saying a word, he drew a circle with his right hand and summoned a golden dimensional gate. Let's go. Before Wanda could say anything more, he had already hugged Wanda and came to the manor. Looks like the deal hasn't been reached yet. In the distance, Tony looked at the two figures crossing the dimensional gate and shook his head helplessly. Just now, they asked Wanda to go over because they wanted Wanda to see if she could introduce him. He really hoped to let this mysterious man join their Avengers. After all, the strength of this mysterious man is much stronger than they imagined. If they can win him over, then they will no longer have to worry about any accidents when they face a crisis in the future. It's normal. After all, such a being wouldn't want to join this kind of game. Rhodes stood aside and shrugged his shoulders, with an expression of, as expected. In fact, he had already guessed that the other party had everything he needed. With such a strong power, money, status, fame and fortune were all within his reach. Joining the Avengers was just adding to his own troubles. But this is really a pity. If such a strong force can be used to protect the Earth. Steve sat on a fallen tree and shook his head with a helpless look. He was a little disappointed with the result. The greater the ability, the greater the responsibility. But the other party obviously didn't want to take these responsibilities. Forget it, guys, we still have a lot of things to deal with. Tony clapped his hands and turned to walk towards the Quinjet. The work on the scene has been taken over by the police. And there are no injured residents nearby, so they should just go to other places to help with disaster relief. Inside the manor, Lorna was lying on the sofa in a short skirt, watching TV series, humming and swinging her legs from time to time. This kind of life is simply comfortable for her, and she can eat whatever she wants. Buzz. Lorna. With a buzzing sound, Lorna turned around and saw that Hood was holding Wanda and walked directly through the dimensional door into the living room. Mr. Hood, sister. When Lorna saw the two of them, even her movements froze. She really didn't expect Hood to come back at this time, and she actually showed such a casual scene. She even forgot to eat the potato chips, but immediately sat up straight, her face flushed. It's okay, you don't have to be so nervous. Hodder chuckled. Lorna was quite cute in some ways. Although she had been here for a while, she had never relaxed in front of him. This led to Lorna hiding in her room most of the time if he was at home. It was rare to see Lorna so leisurely in the living room. Lorna. Wanda looked at her half-sister with a complex look in her eyes. It must be said that after getting close to her sister, a unique feeling emerged in her heart. This is a feeling of blood connection, a feeling like she is very familiar with the sister in front of her. Sister. Lorna was obviously very restrained. She didn't even know how she should face her family. She was happy but also a little scared, as if she would be abandoned at any time. Go and have a good talk with your sister. Hood slapped the bulge suddenly and said with a smile. With a crisp sound, Wanda's face turned red instantly. She glared at Hood angrily and annoyedly. What are you doing? Your sister is still here. When her sister was suddenly attacked, her expression seemed extremely embarrassed. But because of this, Wanda's mood suddenly relaxed a lot. The two sat on the sofa and talked about their experiences. It has to be said that the two of them are in the same boat. They are in the current situation because of Hydra. After half an hour, Lorna suddenly seemed to remember something, patted her little head and said, Mr. Hood, sister, you haven't eaten yet, right? No, Wanda nodded subconsciously. After all, they rushed over immediately after the incident, so they must have eaten nothing. However, Hood's face became very strange, even a little ugly. He suddenly felt a bad premonition. I specially cooked today, just in time for you and Mr. Hood to try it. When Lorna opened her mouth, Hood's heart finally died. Although he had guessed what would happen next, he still felt like his whole body was about to break apart after knowing it. Hood looked at the excited Lorna, and finally sighed helplessly. He wanted to refuse, but this was Lorna's gift after all. And Wanda was here too, so it would not be appropriate to refuse. Lorna brought the two to the restaurant and quickly took out all the prepared food from the insulated box. This time, she cooked 10 dishes. Although they were not delicious, they were delicious. From the appearance, it was many times better than the last time. Lorna, did you make all this? Wanda was surprised. She herself was not a good cook. She did not expect her sister to be such a good cook. Almost. Sister Imelda helped me a lot. Lorna scratched the back of her head in embarrassment. Because when she started cooking, most of the dishes were burnt or 160% undercooked. It was also because of Imelda that she was able to cook so many dishes. Lorna has really improved a lot. Hodder was so pleased that he almost cried. He had made up his mind to give Imelda a raise no matter what. If it weren't for Imelda, Lorna's KDA would probably be +2 today. At the dinner table, everyone was having a great time. Wanda couldn't help but look at the one beside her. Under the light, the angular face looked much softer at the moment. She couldn't help but put her hand on Hodder's leg. She didn't know how long it had been, and she finally felt at home again. All this was brought to her by Hodder. Hod felt the slender palm and met Wanda's eyes. In the next second, a meaningful look appeared on his face. He didn't expect that sometimes Wanda would be more proactive than him. Lorna, you should eat first. Your sister and I will go upstairs to do some work. Lorna was stunned when she heard this. What work? But before she could ask, she saw Hood hugging her sister and walking upstairs quickly. Mr. Hood and his sister are so loving. Lorna looked at Hood and Wanda's passion with envy. But for her, her sister is happy, she is happy. Hod, can we go out and play in a few days? Wanda stretched and the pain in her body was relieved at this time. Sure, where do you want to go? Hodder agreed casually. After all, he had nothing to do recently and was free anyway. He might as well go out with Wanda and maybe find some other fun things to do. I want to go to Westview for vacation. It's a town I saw when I passed by before. It has pleasant scenery and cherry blossoms in full bloom. Wanda said her thoughts without hesitation. Hood didn't expect Wanda to go to Westview for vacation. Westview, in the original book, was Wanda's dream settlement, where she wanted to start a family with her lover. In other words, Wanda has now completely accepted herself. We can drive there by ourselves and enjoy the scenery along the way. Wanda held Hood's hand and spoke in a pleading tone. Hood nodded and listened to her arrangements. At this time, the sun was setting, and Hood took Wanda to the balcony of the room to enjoy the sunset. It was just right to enjoy the sunset here. Suddenly, the manor alarm sounded. Master, there is an intruder outside. The Red Queen's voice suddenly sounded. Intruder, Hodder thought, and immediately sensed everything in the manor. The next second, he felt Gwen in the ghost spider suit staggering into the wall. She looked a little embarrassed, and just after she climbed over the wall, she fell to the ground and didn't move. It's Gwen, she's not doing well. Hod and Wanda got up quickly and went downstairs to find Gwen. In the yard, Gwen lay on the ground, groaning softly, her battle suit covered with dust. Even her hood had a crack on it, clearly from a fight with someone else. Gwen. Hood stepped forward quickly and picked up Gwen. Wanda hurriedly followed Hood and took Gwen to the messy room. After putting Gwen on the bed, Hood carefully took off her hood. The pain had soaked Gwen's hair with sweat, and her face was full of pain. Her body twitched slightly, and her fair face was covered with bruises. Who did this? When Hod saw this, veins popped up on his forehead. He never thought that someone would attack Gwen. Moreover, Gwen's injuries were very serious. According to his examination, even her internal organs were severely damaged. It can be said that Gwen was able to get here entirely by perseverance. If she didn't have this kind of perseverance, she would probably have collapsed halfway. She looks so painful. Wanda gritted her teeth, and couldn't help but feel a little distressed. The person who did it was too cruel, otherwise Gwen wouldn't have suffered such a serious injury with her skills. Hod put his hand on Gwen's hand, and the horse charm on his right hand began to flash. Green energy was continuously input into Gwen's body through physical contact. With the input of energy from the horse charm, Gwen's injuries began to improve at a very fast speed. The originally painful expression also became much more relaxed after the energy was injected. Lorna, go get her a glass of water. Wanda turned her head and looked at Lorna beside her and said. Although Wanda had many questions she wanted to ask, she knew that this was not the right time. And she didn't know what happened to this little girl. With such strong skills, she was injured so badly. When the energy in her body repaired Gwen's injuries, Gwen suddenly opened her eyes. Her pupils were filled with fear and terror. The moment she saw Hood, the fear and vigilance in her eyes disappeared instantly. Hodder. Gwen threw herself into Hodder's arms, her eyes instantly turning red. Even her voice was trembling. The enemy she met this time was so terrifying that she even thought she would never come back. Wanda, who was beside her, watched Gwen's actions, and the jealousy in her heart had disappeared. After all, she was just a poor little girl. At least she had partners in the Avengers, but little Gwen had always relied on herself to maintain the safety of the people. It's okay, it's okay. Hod gently patted Gwen's back and spoke to comfort her. He could see that Gwen was now extremely frightened. I almost thought I would never come back. Gwen's tall and small nose kept twitching, and she sobbed as she spoke. She really thought she was about to die, and when she was still somewhat conscious, she kept rushing towards Horde. But fortunately, she still arrived at the last moment. What happened? After comforting Gwen for a while, Hodder asked about this matter. Since the other party dared to attack Gwen, he would not let him go. But the most urgent task now is to find out what happened. I've been investigating a guy codenamed Vulture recently. I found a clue after school this afternoon, but I didn't expect to be ambushed while following him. Gwen's eyes were red as she told him everything she knew. The opponent was not strong in frontal combat, but he could fly. He also carried many different weapons, which made her even more flustered. In the end, if the opponent hadn't been careless, she would have really died. Vulture. When Hood heard the name, he was stunned. Although this world was very different from what he imagined, he never thought that he would meet Vulture in this universe. Vulture's name was Adrian Toombs, and he ran a recycling company in New York. The reason why Hood was so surprised by his appearance was because Vulture was the father of Liz Toombs. He was also the father of the object of the Spider Peter Parker's secret crush in another world, but this guy was also a poor man. Because he spent a lot of money and finally got the government's authorization to recycle the Chidori's waste. Then he used these wastes to study alien technology and took advantage of it. He had the opportunity to make a fortune. But he never expected that the establishment of the damage control department headed by Stark Industries would lead to the unilateral cancellation of the authorized cooperation by the government. It was also because of this that he faced bankruptcy, so he began to hate the Avengers and hide the recycled Chidori waste. But he didn't expect that this guy would happen to meet Gwen. Although Gwen's strength is good, she is still a little worse than the battle suit worn by Vulture. What's more, Vulture's battlesuit is not only able to fly, but also has many other uses. If he faced Tony, he would indeed be beaten, but Gwen is too weak, so this happened. Vulture, right, Wanda gritted her teeth and said with anger in her voice. Don't worry, I will help you get rid of this guy. Although Gwen is indeed her rival in love, she has let it go now. What's more, she also sympathizes with this poor child. When she returned, she specifically investigated Gwen's life experience and learned about what happened to Gwen. She is so young, but she has to bear so much pressure. While taking care of her father, she also has to fight against evil forces. This is too much for a child who has just entered college to bear. You go. Hodder was stunned. He really didn't expect Wanda to take the initiative to ask to help Gwen. After all, the relationship between the two is indeed a little special. You seem surprised. Wanda crossed her arms in dissatisfaction, revealing her full body. I'm not that petty, one thing at a time. Helping Gwen doesn't mean I want to sleep in the same bed with her. After all, she is not stupid. After connecting with the previous things, she guessed that Gwen was the ghost spider. And after dealing with the barbarians, the two of them were most likely going on a tryst. She couldn't help getting angry just thinking about it, but she didn't blame Gwen for this. After all, in her opinion, the Playboy Hood was not a man who would settle down. Ha. Hodder scratched the back of his head with an embarrassed look. Gwen, you haven't eaten yet, right? He didn't intend to continue to argue on this topic. Well, I want to eat steak. Because Gwen had recovered, she quickly forgot what happened just now after hearing this. And in front of Hood, she was like a child. And there was another point. She didn't know how to face Wanda. When she was in the park before, she had thought about facing her truest feelings. But she didn't expect to meet Hela at that time, so she didn't say it in the end. Although she wanted to say it now, Wanda was beside her, and she couldn't speak for a long time. Okay, I'll cook it for you. Hod wanted to rub Gwen's head with his hand, but he noticed Wanda standing beside him and finally withdrew his hand with a smile. Steak is a very easy food to make. In a few minutes, it was served to Gwen. I'm full. Gwen smiled with her eyes almost slitted. She had been thinking about Hood's cooking skills for a while. But there were too many things to do at school, and she had no time to spare because of fighting criminals. Today, she finally got to enjoy Hood's cooking skills. Take a shower after you finish eating. Wanda looked at Gwen with a smile. After all, Gwen's combat uniform was already covered with dust. And it must be uncomfortable to wear such tight clothes all the time. Okay. Faced with Wanda's proposal, Gwen raised her lips and nodded without hesitation. After all, she was feeling suffocated now, and she had sweated a lot during the battle just now. As for the combat uniform, after Gwen changed it, Wanda picked up the combat uniform and walked towards the laundry room downstairs. After washing it, she checked if there was any damage, and then asked the maid at home to help mend it. No. Just as Wanda was about to put Gwen's combat uniform into the washing machine, she suddenly noticed something wrong. There were traces of mending in the crotch area. In an instant, her mind flashed back to what happened that night. Could it be that? Her expression froze instantly, and she carefully lifted a corner. Although the same color thread was used when mending, the stitches could still be seen if one looked closely. This was clearly the same torn position as the last time they were together with Hood. In other words, the last time she. At this moment, Wanda's face flushed. She had never thought it would be like this. Hodder. Wanda took a deep breath, and the sound seemed to come out from between her teeth. She never thought that this would happen. Now she finally understood why Hodder seemed to have been injected with adrenaline. This was clearly Gwen's battlesuit, and this guy had obviously mixed it in by accident. What's wrong? Hod happened to be walking down the stairs, and heard Wanda's suppressed voice and asked in confusion. The next second, the expression on his face froze, because he clearly saw the spider suit in Wanda's hand. My dear Mr. Hodder, can you explain to me what this uniform is about? Wanda came to Hodder with a stiff smile, holding the uniform and shaking it. What's going on? Haha, I seem to have forgotten to ask Imelda to clean up the room. Hodder touched the back of his head, forced a smile and prepared to run away, but the next second that stiff smile appeared in front of him. Wouldn't that be the day? Wanda lowered her head, showing the stitches more clearly. no wonder you had so much fun. From her tone, one can hear Wanda's suppressed anger and shyness. Her face was already red, and even the tips of her ears had turned pink. This is no longer cuz, this is a real-time performance of wearing a combat uniform, right? Closing square bracket. And the latter dress was actually worn by Gwen again. This feeling made Wanda's expression more and more wrong. This one. Hood hesitated awkwardly, rubbing the back of his head and unable to speak. The evidence was right in front of him, who could have thought it would be like this? What he didn't expect was that Gwen didn't throw the suit away. Instead, he patched it up and continued to wear it. If he knew it would be like this, he would never give it back to Gwen. So this is the suit I wore that night. I was wondering why it disappeared. Wanda's tone was filled with anger, and one could even hear the sound of her teeth grinding. Calm down, this is your own choice, and you said it's pretty good. Hodder raised his hand, the corners of his mouth couldn't help but rise. Besides, aren't you very happy too? He really couldn't help it, he couldn't imagine how shy Wanda was now. Hodder. Wanda raised her hand and pinched Hodder. Don't say it. She couldn't imagine what would happen if Gwen knew about this. She would really not be able to hold her head up at that time. You can wear it again if you like. Hood turned around and ran. The two chased each other in the house. Lorna was swinging her feet in the living room. Looking at this scene, she couldn't help but sigh. Sister and Mr. Hood have a really good relationship. In the guest room, although Gwen's injuries have healed, but the mental exhaustion still made Gwen lie in bed and sleep for several hours. When she woke up, she opened the door in a daze. The moment she opened it, Wanda, who was sitting on the sofa, turned her head and looked at her. Then the fair skin on her face suddenly turned pink. What's wrong? Gwen touched her face and kept looking at herself. Why did Wanda see her like this? Nothing. Wanda waved her hands nervously. Hood, I want to seek revenge on Vulture. Gwen came to Hood and said through gritted teeth, have I washed my battle suit? After suffering such a big loss, she definitely couldn't just let it go. Okay. Hood patted Wanda who was sitting next to him and said with a sly smile, where's the battle suit? Put it on Gwen quickly. You. Wanda glared at Mahao Jiao Hood beside her, and recalled what she had done before when she wore this battle suit, and her expression was extremely embarrassed. Good. Okay. She went to the laundry room and took out the suit. When she looked at a certain spot, her heartbeat accelerated. She had never thought that she had done something so exciting without realizing it. What's wrong? Gwen looked at Wanda in confusion. She felt that Wanda seemed to be hesitating. Why don't you change into a different uniform? Wanda took a deep breath, even pleading a little. After all, this uniform was. She felt embarrassed and uncomfortable just thinking about it. Although it had been a long time, every time she saw it, she would recall what happened that night. What's more, the person who was responsible that night should have been downstairs, and her face turned red. No need, as long as it works. Gwen rejected Wanda's generous offer. She smelled the battle suit and said, hey, Mr. Hood, you didn't use heather-scented laundry detergent this time. Cough cough cough. Hood, who was drinking coffee, had a red face and kept coughing violently. Behind him, Wanda lowered her head and pinched Hood's waist fiercely. Hood, this guy is simply a pervert. If she knew it was Gwen's battle uniform, she would never wear it. And this guy even lied to her that it was a cuz battle uniform, which was obviously intentional. Gwen, where are we going first? Hodder suppressed his smile and waited for Gwen to change into her combat uniform before preparing to go out. The clue I found is in the Grunfo's warehouse in Queens. But this time it was not Manhattan that suffered, but Queens. Hod nodded casually and made a stroke with his right hand. As the golden light lit up, the dimensional door opened. A warehouse appeared at the other end. Yes, it's here. Gwen gritted her teeth and crossed the dimensional door. Hod stretched and said lightly, then let's get started. The warehouse is located in the suburbs, and the surroundings are quiet. Gwen carefully observes the movements around. No need to look, there's no one here. Hod thought, and immediately sensed that there was no sign of any human activity in the warehouse. He's not here. Gwen frowned. According to the information she had found, the vultures would basically be in this warehouse. Let's go in and take a look first. Hodder took the lead and strode towards the warehouse door. After taking 2 steps, A smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. I didn't expect this guy to be so cautious. What? Gwen didn't quite understand what Hod meant, and looked at Hod with a puzzled look. Hod hooked his right hand, and the soil on the side began to turn up quickly. When all the soil was turned up, 5 individual combat mines appeared. This guy actually set a mine at the door of his warehouse. Gwen's eyes widened. If it wasn't for Hood, she might have stepped on it. She never thought that Vulture would be so cautious. It seems that vultures are quite interesting. Hodder crushed the detonator with his right hand, and threw the abandoned mine into a corner. It must be said that vultures know where their weaknesses are. So even in their own place, they will be extra cautious. There is no sign of anyone passing by. The door of the warehouse is a very traditional double opening door, and there is a big lock on it. The lock alone is as big as a head, which shows that the things inside are very important to the vulture. Without waiting for Hodder to make a move, Da used chaos magic to twist the lock into a ball of soft plasticine. The moment Hodder opened the door, the things inside also appeared in front of everyone. There were many military green cargo boxes placed inside. What are these? Gwen walked over and opened a box, only to see some broken weapon parts inside. The words written on it were clearly the weapon parts that the Chitauri had discarded before. This guy actually used the discarded parts of the Chitauri to assemble weapons. Gwen's eyes widened. She was wondering where Vulture got his weapons from. She didn't expect that these were all made by modifying the discarded weapon parts of the Chitauri. It's not that simple. Hod raised his right hand and slightly hooked his index finger. All the boxes in the warehouse outside were opened. Most of them were discarded weapon parts of the Chitauri. Come and see. Gwen came to the southeast corner of the warehouse and his eyes widened when he saw the parts inside. Saw that what was placed inside was high-tech weapons. This guy actually modified these weapons successfully. Wanda walked to the front of the cargo box, and after seeing the weapons inside, the hole suddenly shrank. It seems that the person Tony has been investigating for smuggling goods recently is Vulture. Recently, she also knew that Tony was very concerned about the smuggling of weapons. Because the weapons in them were all weapons left by the Chitauri before, after being modified, their power has been greatly increased. And each batch of weapons that left the country has caused huge casualties to civilians overseas. However, the other party's means of transporting weapons is too covert, and even Tony does not have a good solution. After all, the other party is transporting goods secretly, and he doesn't even have enough time to react. If you are investigating smuggled weapons, then this is most likely the batch you are looking for. Gwen took a deep breath and said her inference solemnly. Because she has been investigating Vulture and found that Vulture has been engaged in smuggling. However, because she has not found this place, she is not sure what Vulture is smuggling. It seems that this time we have killed 2 birds with 1 stone, and Tony doesn't have to keep looking for it. Wanda smiled. After all, the Vulture was hiding too deep. And now the Avengers have a lot of work on hand, so they can't spare the time to look for it. Now it's good, they can solve it all at once. I don't know where this guy has gone. Gwen frowned. It's impossible for her to wait here forever. Let's go down and take a look. Hood suddenly said, there is a space underneath. If he hadn't used his perception, he would never have thought that Vulture had put something else underneath. Under Hood's leadership, the two soon came to a carpet. The carpet looked black and it was so dirty that no one knew how dirty it was. Hood hooked his right hand, and as the carpet was opened, a steel door suddenly appeared underneath. This was clearly the entrance to the basement below. It's locked with a combination lock. Gwen squatted down, opened a cover and frowned. If it was a combination lock, it would be impossible to get in. Password. Hodder put on the Bluetooth headset and said, Red Queen, crack this password. Although it can be opened directly by force, it is connected to the internet after all. Once it is opened by force, it is likely to alert the enemy. Master, it's already opened. In just a few seconds, the password in front of me was automatically entered. Mr. Hodder, what is this? Gwen was stunned. She knew that there was such an operation. This made her surprised. It's just an AI. Hod did not explain the origin of the Red Queen in detail. Gwen did not care too much. After the basement was opened, she walked in immediately. As the lights turned on, everything inside came into view. The warehouse below was actually made of steel. Not only that, but there were all kinds of materials piled up everywhere. This is clearly an underground research room, which looks to be about 300 square meters. Although it is not large, there are all kinds of equipment everywhere. As for those materials, they can be recognized at a glance. These materials are all parts of various weapons. Some weapons have not been assembled, but it can be seen that these weapons are clearly the weapon materials of the Chitauri. This guy's weapons were actually modified here. Wanda was a little shocked. You know, the Chitauri weapons are very complex. This guy called Vulture can actually assemble them by himself. In a sense, Vulture can be regarded as a genius in scientific research. After all, the Chitauri are alien civilizations, and many aspects are very different from the technology on Earth. But even so, Vulture still developed it. Laser cannon, self-propelled ballistic sight, laser gun. Hod stood in front of these scattered weapons and could tell the functions of them at a glance. What he didn't expect was that these weapons were basically pieced together. Some of them were even modified by him. Come and see. Gwen stood in front of a computer and called out to the two in a hurry. When the two came to Gwen's side, they also saw the contents of the computer. Bank robbery plan. When everyone saw the title above, they immediately understood what Vulture was going to do next. They are going to take action tonight, but there are so many banks here that they have no way to lock them down. Gwen couldn't help but have a headache looking at the plan above. From the content, it can be seen that this is not only a plan for escape, but also a subsequent route for selling the stolen goods. At the same time, even the time of action is clearly written, which clearly shows that the action is going to be carried out today. And the target chosen is clearly a bank in Queens, but there is no specific mark on which bank it is. All that can be seen are drawings of bank vaults and the like. But with just drawings, there is no way to determine the current target of Vulture in a short time. I'll let Tony know, Wanda said hesitantly. If Tony were to search, he should be able to locate the other party quickly. No, I have a way. Hodder waved his hand to stop Wanda from calling, and said directly, Red Queen, help me lock the current position of Vulture. Although he can instantly cover it through perception, it is still quite troublesome to find it without confirming the other party's breath. In comparison, Red Queen will search faster. After all, as long as there is a webcam. No matter where it is, Red Queen can lock it immediately. Master, we have located the opponent. Vulture is currently in the alley to the right of the Jesk Bank branch. In less than 3 seconds, Red Queen had already locked onto Vulture's current location through the internet. We found the Vulture. Should I do it or not? Hod turned to look at Gwen beside him and asked. After all, if he did it, he could make such a creature disappear from the world even if he didn't arrive at the scene. In this case, he would have to run over again. I want revenge myself. Gwen took a deep breath and looked at Hood with a determined look. If it weren't for the Vulture's sneak attack, she would never fall into disadvantage so easily. Moreover, she didn't want to hide under Hood's wings all the time. She believed that she could get rid of the Vulture. Outside the Jesk Bank in Queens, 5 figures appeared in the alley on the side. And one of the figures was the most eye-catching. There was a pair of huge mechanical wings behind him. The coat he wore was hung with all kinds of weapons. And the most eye-catching thing was the mask on his face. Unlike the headgear of the other people, the mask on his head was like a medieval doctor. It was a mask similar to a bird's beak, but compared to that mask, the beak of this mask is obviously much smaller. The people around him were holding weapons and waiting for the Vulture's orders with solemn expressions. Are you ready? Vulture raised his hand, looked at the designated time and asked. After seeing several people nod in affirmation, he pressed the button without hesitation. Ding! The bank's electronic network-controlled door slowly opened. In the middle of the night, the opening of this door did not attract anyone's attention. This was a program specially set by Vulture. As long as he pressed the button, all nearby connections would be cut off immediately. This would prevent the police from watching all nearby surveillance in real time. Not only that, it could also open all the networked doors in the bank by itself. Boss, you are awesome. One of the younger brothers couldn't help but exclaim. This saved them a lot of effort. Apart from anything else, at least they didn't have to worry about being discovered in the short term. Stop talking nonsense. Vulture led the way into the bank coldly. We only have 10 minutes now. Although the camera has been hacked, the police's internal detection system is not for show. They will definitely be discovered in 10 minutes, and the nearest police station is only 8 minutes away. So this must be resolved within 20 minutes to ensure a safe departure. Vulture has studied the route to the vault many times and arrived outside the vault without any effort. The 4 people brought by Vulture didn't even need to speak. When they saw the vault, they immediately installed the bomb on the vault door. Boom! With several loud noises, the door of the vault suddenly exploded. And all the safes inside came into view. Boss, this time we are really rich. When several people rushed in, they couldn't help but let out a sharp cheer. Although the cash and other things in the bank will be taken away at night. But the biggest feature of this bank is that it stores a lot of personal belongings. These personal belongings are priceless, even those luxury jewels are countless. Stop talking nonsense to me, hurry up. Vulture frowned and gritted his teeth. He also walked quickly towards one of the safes. His purpose this time was not just for money. Because if it was money, he could sell weapons. His main purpose was that a shareholder of Stark Company hid some secrets here. And his target was naturally this information. Just when he was about to take out the information, footsteps were heard outside the vault door. It seems that you are quite fast. Hodder walked in with Wanda and Gwen. Looking at the mess around him, Hodder couldn't help but sigh. After all, the work efficiency was too fast. If it was implemented according to the planned plan, it would have taken less than 3 minutes to open the vault door. Even professional robbers would never be faster than them. Vulture, just wait for your capture. Gwen leaned down and assumed a fighting stance. I thought who it was, but it turned out to be Ghost Spider. I didn't expect you to be alive. After seeing Gwen, Vulture let out a muffled laugh from under his mask. I will definitely not die, but you may not. Gwen gritted her teeth and stared at the Vulture. She would never take it lightly this time. Moreover, this was in the vault. Although the space was large, it was much better than being on the street. At least she could handle the Vulture's flying ability. Wait, are you Hood from Stark Company? At this moment, Vulture suddenly noticed Hood beside Gwen. The reason why he knew so much was because he hated Stark Company so much. He had memorized all the shareholders' information firmly in his mind. Right, you want an autograph. Hodder raised his lips and said in a teasing tone. Die. Vulture didn't give the others a chance to react, and started at 0 frame. But before he could pounce, Gwen immediately entangled him. With 2 spider silks sprayed out, the Vulture's wings were directly glued to the ground. As for the other 4 people, they were about to take out the weapons that Vulture gave them. A crimson light flashed, and their weapons began to melt instantly. In just a moment, these people had turned into flying ash. Vulture couldn't help cursing. If the 4 people had reacted faster, it would never have turned out like this. But there was nothing he could do. He just picked someone to take the blame. What's worse is that Gwen already knew his advantage. So he immediately stuck his wings. And the next second, Gwen had come behind him through the wall. Crack! A sharp sound was heard, and the wings behind him were torn off by Gwen. Inside the vault, the wounded Vulture fell to the ground. The mask on his face was torn off and thrown aside. His chest was heaving slightly, and his eyes had become extremely dim. He had wanted to force his way out with the armor, but he didn't expect the Scarlet Witch to pull him back into the vault with just a wave of her hand. What awaited him next was a one-sided beating. In such a confined space, there was no way to use the wings. Not to mention that the wings had been destroyed by Gwen in the first place. Gwen, it seems that you have become stronger again. Hodder couldn't help but stepped forward and rubbed Gwen's little head. It must be said that Gwen's performance just now was beyond his expectations. Compared with before, her reaction movements became more agile. At the same time, she made full use of the terrain advantage and tied up the Vulture with spider silk and beat him up. In the face of head-on confrontation, Gwen's strength far exceeded that of the Vulture. Hodder. Wanda saw Hodder rubbing Gwen's head, and her mouth couldn't help but pout slightly. This was clearly her exclusive treatment before, but now it was taken away by Gwen. What's wrong? Hodder looked at Wanda and hugged her. I have to say, it feels really good to rub her head with the left side and hug her waist with the right side. You guy. Wanda gritted her teeth and twisted Hood's waist fiercely. From the expression on Hood's face, it can be seen that this guy must be thinking of something bad. No matter what, Hood must not succeed. So, what should we do with this guy? Gwen raised his chin and gestured to the Vulture on the ground. It's impossible to just leave this guy here now. It seems. Just as Huoda was hesitating whether to send the man to the police station, the sound of sirens came from outside. The police are here. Gwen raised her head and looked towards the exit. This saves us a lot of effort. Wanda sighed with a smile on her face. After all, the door of the bank is open now. If they leave like this, who knows if someone else will rush in. After all, this is New York, a free country, where all kinds of people can come. Let's leave first. Hodder retracted his hand and swiped his right hand in the air. A dazzling golden light emerged. He put his arms around Gwen and Wanda's waists and stepped directly into the dimensional gate. He didn't want Wanda and Gwen to stay here for the interview. It was hard to have some free time to cultivate feelings. Don't waste it on this insignificant Vulture. Anyway, when the police come, they will definitely arrest the Vulture. The next day, a news report was being broadcast on the big screen TV in the Manor's living room. Scarlet Witch and Ghost Spider team up to punish criminals. And it also released close-up photos of Gwen and Wanda. I didn't expect these policemen to be useful. Hodder couldn't help but sigh as he watched this scene. It was normal to recognize Spider-Man. After all, there were spider silks everywhere in the vault. But it was not easy to recognize Scarlet Witch was there too. After all, Wanda's power was different from before. Humph, I deliberately let them know that I took action. Wanda raised her head proudly. Although the reputation of the Avengers has been restored, we should still let the media report more. She had already thought of this. After all, there are still some people who oppose the Avengers. She also plans to let them know who is protecting them through the news. Because Hood once taught her that sometimes heroes must let everyone know when they do good things. Instead of being unknown. The reason why Gwen needs to be unknown is because Gwen is still a student. So she needs to deliberately hide her identity so as not to disturb her normal life. What's more, Gwen doesn't make a living by being a hero. It seems that our little Wanda is quite smart. Hodder smiled and approached Wanda, with a smile on his face. So should I give you a small reward? Get away from me. Wanda raised her eyebrows. In order to deal with Hood, she secretly went to sleep with Gwen yesterday. Just to let this devil know the mistake of wearing the wrong uniform for her. But the combination of the two of you is indeed popular. Look how popular it is. Hodder raised his eyebrows and looked at the comments about the two of them. It can be said that all of them were positive. Of course, my sister Gwen and I are very good friends. Wanda stood up and sat next to Gwen and hugged her. After chatting last night, she let go of a lot of the grudges in her heart. And she liked this silly and cute little sister more and more. But these media do like to hype these things. Gwen has become accustomed to these reports. This is how she survives on hype. There was quite a lot of hype about her before, and even many people used her identity everywhere. Let's go out to Westview Town to play, shall we? Hodder leaned on the sofa and took the initiative to speak. He clearly remembered that Wanda wanted to go out to play. Since he was free now, he might as well take Wanda out for a walk. Besides, Wanda didn't have much time to relax. Really. When Wanda heard this, her eyes sparkled and she threw herself at Hood. She had thought it would take a long time for Hood to be able to spare time to accompany her. Unexpectedly, Hood actually planned to leave today. It's better to do it today than today, since we are all free anyway. Hoo-oh. His mouth curled up. He would never forget what he promised to a girl. As a veteran in the love field, he would naturally not forget this. If he agrees, then he will definitely be able to do it. And he has thought about pleasing both Gwen and Wanda at the same time, for the sake of his own happiness at the same time. Great. Wanda excitedly kissed Hood on the face. Gwen, who was standing by, watched Wanda's bold move and just quietly held Hood's hand. Although she wanted to do the same, she was still a little shy. By the way, Gwen will come too. Hodder turned and looked at Gwen. If he remembered correctly, Gwen should not have classes these 2 days. And if he took Gwen with him, he could get closer. Gwen was about to nod, but she remembered something and her expression became a little hesitant. What's wrong? Hodder noticed the change in Gwen's expression and asked with a puzzled tone. I don't know if my parents will agree, Gwen said with embarrassment. The reason why she was able to stay here yesterday was because she lied and said she was staying at a classmate's house. If she didn't go back today, it would definitely not work. It's okay, I'll ask them for you. Oda didn't care, he just stood up with a smile and said, let's go, we'll go to meet you together, and by the way, I'll ask you to pack your personal belongings. After all, Gwen's family is quite reasonable, so there shouldn't be any big problems. Because this is a self-driving tour, Hood didn't drive a bumblebee this time. Instead, he chose an LM Palazzo. This is an RV, and it is also the most expensive RV at present. It is not only large enough, but also has basically everything inside. Otherwise, if they go out together, it would be uncomfortable to drive a car that is too small. The point is that there are very few service areas on the roads in the United States, so it is still necessary to travel in an RV. As the car started, it seemed as if it was made of gold all over. From the outside, it exudes a dazzling golden light, and just driving it out has attracted the attention of many people. After all, LM Palazzo is very rare. Because they were afraid that Stacy and her husband would think too much, Wanda stayed in the car alone when they went back. Gwen and Hood went up to Gwen's house. As soon as they knocked on the door opened immediately. Hodder, you're here. When Helen saw Hodder, her eyes lit up first, and then she noticed her daughter. Hello, Aunt Helen, where's Uncle George? Hodder greeted immediately and noticed that George didn't seem to be at home. He went to work. Helen smiled and invited Hood in. However, after her eyes swept over the two of them, a barely perceptible smile flashed across her lips. It seems that her lovely daughter has secretly learned to lie. Otherwise, how could she say she was going to live at a classmate's house yesterday? You know, Gwen basically won't say it at the last minute, even if she is going to live at a classmate's house, she will say it in advance. It is estimated that this little girl ran to Hood's house to live last night. But she didn't care much, after all, she was still very satisfied with Hood. After all, George had found out the information about Hood a long time ago. He is rich and handsome, and he seems to be very gentle to his daughter. Mom, I want to go out with Hood for a few days. Gwen grabbed the corner of her clothes and said hesitantly. She didn't know whether her mother would let her go out. After all, her family education was very strict. Otherwise, she wouldn't be so anxious to call the police if she didn't come home one night. Yes, Aunt Helen, I want to take Gwen out for a walk. You don't have to worry about her safety. At this time, Hod also spoke up immediately. After all, they were going to take Gwen out, so it was normal for Stacy and his wife to be worried. Okay, then you guys go have fun. Gwen didn't expect that Helen would agree to it straight away. The reason why Helen agreed was because she believed in Hood. Secondly, it was a holiday anyway, and it wasn't good to stay at home. When George was in a vegetative state, Gwen had never dared to go out far. Now it was time for Gwen to have a good time. And this would also allow the two of them to cultivate their relationship. After packing her luggage, Gwen got into the car excitedly. As LM Palazzo started, Hood took Wanda, Gwen, and Lorna to the highway. Westview Town is located in a remote area, and it takes a day to drive there. Although the journey is a bit far, the road passes through the fields of the plains, and the beautiful scenery is enough to make people ignore the boredom of this long journey. Along the way, several people jumped happily. And if you drive, you don't have to worry at all. After all, there is Red Queen. As the strongest artificial intelligence in the world, this little thing is not a problem for Red Queen. A day later, LM Palazzo slowly stopped in front of a villa that had been purchased a long time ago. Because it was purchased a day in advance, everything inside was already prepared. The place you picked is quite suitable for rest and recuperation. Hodder sat outside the door of the villa, looking at the scenery outside and couldn't help but sigh. This leisurely day is indeed his favorite. Of course. Wanda heaved a sigh of relief when she heard that. This vacation will definitely not disappoint you. 9 realms, the lower half of the world tree. Nidavi. Rumble, as a blue light like a barrier appeared in the sky. The mothership, like a steel monster, enveloped the sky above Nidavi. 4 pairs of terrifying steel wings seemed to be able to cover the entire city. Everyone below couldn't help but look up at this horrifying scene. There was a look of fear on their faces, and they had no idea what was going on. Bang! Before they could react, there was a loud bang. In the center of Nidavi, a house in front of the fortress was hit by a shell. The house collapsed instantly. Run! There are enemies. What on earth is it? Quote. The dwarves fled in terror, each with a look of panic on their face. Although they were dwarves, their adult bodies were almost as big as the Hulk. But even so, they could not hide the fear in their hearts. Boom! But before they could run out, they heard a terrifying explosion in front of them. 5 figures led an army and surrounded them. The dwarves tried to break through the encirclement. But it was no use. Brothers, follow me and charge out. One of the dwarves picked up their weapons and gritted their teeth to break out from the front. But just as they were about to charge, a thin and tall man with a refined demeanor slowly walked out. He just waved his right hand slightly, and countless stones floated up and turned into spikes that directly pierced them all into hedgehogs. With just one move, dozens of dwarves were killed. One of the dwarves quickened his pace and jumped high with his weapon. But just as he was about to chop Ibanema, a piece of metal suddenly hit him. The next second, the distance he was carrying directly took him through 2 buildings. Then a huge figure quickly rushed down from the sky and stepped hard on his chest. This was clearly Black Dwarf. He drew his weapon calmly with a disdainful smile on his face. Although there were other dwarves who wanted to break through, they couldn't even break through under the obstruction of the Black 5 generals. In the end, those who resisted were captured, but even the dwarves who were captured were beheaded one by General Grim Reaper, and blood flowed on the ground, which looked extremely bloody and cruel. The gate of the fortress was knocked open by a figure from the inside. The huge dwarf fell to the ground, and the ground trembled. The dwarf King Etri screamed in pain. Then a purple figure holding a giant knife walked out. Every step he took was extremely heavy, but there was no urgency at all, but it was steady. It was Thanos. Eitri, don't struggle, just build the Infinity Gauntlet for me. Thanos walked slowly to the front of Eitri, raised the giant knife in his hand and loaded it on the neck of the dwarf King Eitri. I will never do such a thing as you. The dwarf King Etri knows exactly what Thanos is going to do. If he really agrees, the universe will become a mess. Even if I kill all the dwarves, it doesn't matter. I remind you that Odin will no longer protect Nivida, and the people of the god realm can't protect themselves. Thanos has seen what Eitri is thinking, with a cold and bloody look in his eyes. Before Eitri can answer, Thanos nodded slightly to his men beside him. One of the dwarves was dragged up, and with a flash of knife light, the dwarf's head hit the ground heavily. The dwarf King Etri looked at the corpses on the ground and could only agree reluctantly. Thanos stood at the highest point of the Nivida Mountains, overlooking everything. Behind him was a huge army and the 5 obsidian generals. Ebony Maw came to Thanos, slowly knelt on one knee, and raised the Infinity Gauntlet he had created high. I am willing to swear my allegiance to you until death. You are the most powerful being in the universe. Thanos took the Infinity Gauntlet from Ebony Maw, and with a sneer, he slowly put it on. After putting on the Infinity Gauntlet, a golden light burst out from Thanos' eyes, and he clenched his fists tightly. The next stop is the 9 Realms Courtyard. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.